Once he was just a man, and like so many men, his promise, his gifts, were ultimately consumed by the darker aspects of human nature: avarice, unbridled ambition, corruption, a lust for power. But where most such men trade their humanity for the comforts and deceptions of a gilded cage of their own design, the festering sins of this man, amplified 1,000-fold by a tragic madness, unleashed the demon within. A demon without conscience, a demon of unsatiable wrath and hatred, a demon whose evil is not of the pit, or myth, or fable, but of man. A man named Norman Osborn.
This is Comic Geek Speak, episode 1861, Spotlight on the Green Goblin in the Silver Age.
Welcome to Comic Geek Speak. I'm Ian Levinstein.
I'm Adam Bruno.
And I'm Chris Eberle. Let that play a little longer, shall we? How sweet it is in this August heat. We are back in the studio for the first time in about a year.
It is indeed a year, yeah.
Yes. And hey, the internet's up and running again. Hey. Let's cross our fingers. Let's cross our fingers as I lower all of this so we're not super duper loud, but you know, it's going to happen anyway. And I know how to remove that in post for the most part. So yeah, welcome people. It's been way too long and it's back in studio for the Spotlight.
I'm overwhelmed with emotion, gentlemen, to be here with you all, my brethren. Mr. Levinstein once again demonstrated his technical aptitude to get everything up and running. Jury rigging left and right.
Yes, I tried turning it off and on again, and then when that didn't work, I turned it back on.
But then you were plugging things into things and hitting all sorts of keys
That's
in quick
true.
succession.
I went beep, bop, boop, and it doesn't work unless you actually say beep, bop, boop. So just letting you all know about that. But yes, we are indeed in studio here. We are live and in person. Thank you all for continuing to support us at patreon.com/comicgeekspeak, because the studio would not be here without you, and we really do appreciate that. And this is a little bit of a spoiler to say this, but this is one of two episodes we will be recording live from the studio today. So, yes, guess what? They're happening at the same time. But guess what? You don't hear them at the same time because I'm not that type of producer. You get to see behind the curtain that way. There we go.
And it's only fitting since we made the trek to the fabled homeland here.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing so, you got to do as many episodes as you can.
Oh yeah, and for that matter, not only did we make the trek here, but we learned a very important lesson on the way here.
Yes.
It's no longer a one-lane road. You no longer have to worry about
Route
getting
222.
Route 222. If you get stuck behind a buggy, you can actually get yourself around it now. And boy, oh boy, is that a relief.
Whole new world.
The world has changed for the better. Everybody, the world has changed. And let's get that way on camera here, just so everybody could see the wonder of this statue.
Actually, an action figure.
Action figure, but it might as well be a statue. Yeah. This is an old school Marvel Legends figure.
Yes, it is.
Yep.
You're only getting half the picture, though.
Oh, even better.
Go back to ASM 3940.
That little hanging unmasked Peter there.
Yes.
Oh, man. Great stuff.
Recreation of the cover to amazing number
39.
Thank you, as I was buffering.
There you go.
There we go. It is. How green was my goblin?
Now, I am making a pivot on air and saying we'll do mailbag on next episode.
Okay.
Since it seems to be more fittingly appropriate for that. Instead, let's just get straight into the spotlight and make the magic happen.
L. Levinstein has spoken.
Yeah. And that way you don't have to wait even any longer to hear our thoughts on some straight up Silver Age action.
Well, again, Levy Poo, part of the reason I want to do this episode is because I wanted to get your reaction.
Oh, I know.
To peak Spider-Man in the counterculture era.
Boy, oh boy, boy, oh boy. And that you could say many a thing about Stan Lee, but that man knew his jive.
We'll get there, ladies and gentlemen. We'll get there. All right. So I was thinking, all right, we haven't done a spotlight. I haven't done a spotlight in a year.
Mm-hmm.
And who did I want to address? And I thought, who's one of my favorite supervillains of all time besides Doctor Doom? It's the Green Goblin. And then I was telling you on the way here, I'm like, all right, so how do I want to do this? Do I want to do the entire history of the Green Goblin, which would take days because there were so many different Green Goblins and different people behind the mantle and so forth?
We didn't bring sleeping bags with us, so that's not happening.
So I thought, all right, let's do what I know best, what I'm most fond of, which is the Norman Osborn Silver Age era through the famous drug issues, which came out, I want to say, in 1971. So technically the Bronze Age, if for some people keeping score, but many Spider-Man fans consider Spidey's Bronze Age to begin with the death of Gwen.
Yes.
Which we talked about at length in our micro spotlight with Dan Gavazin of Amazing Spider Talk a year or so ago.
Yep. I will get the episode number on that.
The production values of Levinstein.
For people who would like to listen to that. But yes, it was a two-parter.
Yes.
Yes.
Issues 121 to 131.
Yep. And I remember us recording that one because we're like, oh yeah, no, we can definitely get through all of this in one episode. And then 4 hours later, like not so much.
Stowe voice. Yeah, which is why I'm not exactly holding my breath on getting to the promised second episode tonight. We'll just see.
Yes, we will play it by ear and hope for the best.
Indeed.
Indeed. The micro spotlight episode 1769 was the beginning.
That's the Silver Age
That's
one.
the Silver Age one. You
Which
are correct.
also really fun to listen to.
There we
That's
are.
the Clay Tablet Saga.
1787 is what we're looking at here. And also 1786. They were back to back. It was issues 121 through 131 in part one. And I'm sorry, altogether that was it was 121 through 131. Yep. So yeah, those two parters, 1786, 1787, to check that out.
Yep. Thanks, honey. So what we're doing here is we're basically covering up to that point. We're going to be focusing on Norman really in his heyday as the Green Goblin.
Yeah.
And we're going to obviously talk about the impact of that character on Spider-Man's world in particular and also comics in general. Couple things just to sort of lay out the parameters before we get to our always classic first impressions. And I actually want to point out something that's a little complicated right off the bat. When we talk about the first appearance of the Green Goblin, there's a Green Goblin first appearance. Then there's a Norman Osborn first appearance. And furthermore, Norman Osborn technically first appears, and he's a nameless character in the background.
With cornrows?
With cornrows. So we know today it is Norman Osborn. All right? So he first appeared nameless in Amazing Spider-Man 23 at the sort of, the stuffy executive club Jonah will go to, where we'd meet with other like blood-sucking corporate titans, where they'd get a martini and relax about and talk about being masters of the universe. He first appears as the Goblin, just the Green Goblin, of course, the legendary Amazing Spider-Man number 14 in 1964. And then he appears with the name Norman Osborn. He's introduced by name in Amazing Spider-Man number 37, which I want to say was 1965 or 6, I'm guessing.
Yes, it was June of 66 covered.
Murd, clutch, thank you, my friend. Yep. And of course, the creators here are Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, and more on that dynamic in a little bit. And issues we'll be discussing in some length, of course, the first appearance of the Goblin in Spider-Man 14. When Norman's identity is revealed to Peter in Amazing Spider-Man 39 to 40. That's what our action figure, of course, is based on. Yep. Some people may not be as familiar with this book, but it's one of my favorite Spider-Man stories, period, which is Spectacular Spider-Man Magazine number 2.
Yes.
So Marvel did a very quickly aborted Spider-Man Magazine series, 2 issues. This is the second one in color, fabulous John Romita Sr. Painted cover. 1968. Then, of course, we're going to talk about my favorites here. Amazing Spider-Man 96, 97, 98, the famous non-code drug issues.
Indeed. Yep.
Which, of course, the Goblin is the key villain there. We'll also be touching upon Amazing Spider-Man 17, 23, 26 through 27, 37 through 38, all issues involving Norman and or the Goblin. So that's what we'll be addressing. Gentlemen, let me clasp both shoulders. Looking forward to this for a long time.
Yes, as have I.
Because as listeners may not be aware, we haven't actually seen each other physically in a year.
That is very true. Yes, we see each other's mugs on the regular in virtual land, but yes, in person. And Shane, we wish you could be here, but hopefully that will be not too long until all 4 of us are sitting here for an episode
Here.
in the studio.
All right. As always, when we talk about a spotlighted character, let's talk about our initial impressions of the Green Goblin. So you're in the producer's chair. You should go first.
Okay. So my first impression with Norman Osborn as Green Goblin actually goes back to the animated series, Spider-Man the Animated Series, which we'll be discussing.
The 90s show.
Yes.
Okay.
We'll be discussing once we get to other media.
Of course.
Later down the road. It's kind of the first time I really saw him there because when I started reading comics, Murd, around the time that you were probably reading Spider-Man comics, there really wasn't a Norman Osborn in the comics because at the time he was still dead.
Right.
But he got better. Don't worry. And at that point, it's a black mark for some people in the Spider-Man universe, because that was the Clone Saga and all that fun stuff going on. But I enjoyed it for what it was. Then Norman came back in the comics, and he was a force to be reckoned with for quite some time after that. In Marvel Comics in general, when we got to Dark Reign, we got Dark Avengers, all that stuff. When it comes to old school Norman Osborn, when it comes to Silver Age Norman Osborn, I'd read a couple of issues here and there, but these issues I was reading for the first time for this episode today.
Oh, terrific!
And I'll tell you, in his first appearance, that is not the Green Goblin. The very first appearance that we get for him in ASM 14, he's more akin to the Riddler or the Joker.
He's more akin to a mid-60s character.
Exactly, definitely. I mean, he come on, he got him to star in a movie for a plot. I'm still not even quite sure what his actual true machinations behind that were. And showing the cover, guest starring none other than the rampaging powerhouse, the Incredible Hulk. And how's the Hulk show up? Well, they go into his cave.
And it's New Mexico. It's a stomping grounds.
Exactly, clearly. And they just happen to be filming there. But we definitely got way more of a character as Spider-Man comics and Norman Osborn got to grow and evolve over time as Stan grew and evolved over time. I will certainly say that because the later issues that we're discussing, especially the drug ones, I actually enjoyed a great deal. And we'll get further along with that. But this early stuff, you love it for what it is.
What I would say, if I may intervene for a moment, is that I think what matters most about issue 14 is the look.
Oh yes,
of the Goblin.
The look, which is later retconned in Spider-Man comics itself with every single flashback you see to the first meeting between Green Goblin and Spider-Man.
Oh, so they put in the bat glider as opposed to the jet-powered broomstick?
Yes, in said Spectacular Spider-Man magazine.
That's right. Yep.
When we flash back, he's definitely on the glider rather than this very phallic broomstick that he's riding in this, which I'm so glad they got rid of after one appearance without any explanation. It's not a great look. The costume itself, though, is already its iconic look. Outside of that, no
That's
glider, but it's still the
costume, the bag of tricks.
Absolutely, he's in that way. He's already the Green Goblin. That much didn't need any changing. I'm so glad he's not riding that broomstick anymore.
Brother Murdo, your first impressions?
Well, similar to Ian, mine came from an animated series. But for me, it was Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends.
Nice.
Very early 1980s.
Yep.
As a matter of fact, I saw the Triumph of the Green Goblin episode when I was young. That was actually the very first episode of the series I've since. I just today learned, actually, because I had this memory of having seen this episode as one of the few that I caught a glimpse of when I was a very young child. And this show, like the Incredible Hulk series that was on network TV,
it scared you, didn't it?
Yes, yes, it did. It didn't take much to scare young Adam. But of course, in my defense, I was about 3 years old.
Right.
I mean, this thing debuted in the fall of 1981 when I was still 2. It was probably a couple of years after that when I finally saw the reruns.
Right.
But apparently, The Triumph of the Green Goblin was the very first episode, Season 1, Episode 1. And near the opening, we get a shot of Norman Osborn flying along in his private plane with his private pilot, and he's saying to himself, he's a man on the edge. He's worried for the preservation of his sanity. He's clinging to his sanity and his identity by a very tenuous grip, and he's kind of rubbing his hands together and saying, I can go back to being Norman Osborn instead of that other creature. And Fun side note, the guy who did the voice is a guy named Dennis Marks, who also wrote that episode.
Okay.
If he didn't like his dialogue, he has no one but himself to blame. Kind of like Norman, he was a man of two identities there.
Yeah.
He was writing his own fate there. And then the plane starts to go down because he was trying to fly through a lightning storm for no apparent reason, and Norman has to bail out. He has a rough landing, and then...
What happened to the pilot?
We never find out.
You never have to find out, okay? You never have to find out.
There's an extreme close-up of his face, just like his eyeball, and then you hear him say something in a very different-sounding, more high-pitched voice. As a kid, I couldn't really make out what he was. He said something about the Green Goblin, and that was enough to get me to change the channel. Because I was, even at that young age, at like 3 years old, I was familiar with the Jekyll Hyde dynamic, with characters who struggle with their own inner evil, and sometimes through their own doing or through the actions of external phonic forces upon them are transformed into a monstrous form of themselves. I mean, even from like watching Bugs Bunny cartoons as a very young kid, I was familiar with ideas like that and frightened by it. Yeah. So, that's as far as I got with that episode as a kid. And thanks to Disney Plus, I was able to watch a little bit further into it. Still didn't get very far because it just wasn't very good.
I'm glad you weren't traumatized.
I wasn't traumatized
as a
by
grown
it this
man,
time, but I did find the Norman Osborn as the Green Goblin genuinely scary.
Oh, sure.
The first time I was exposed to him at too young an age.
Well, even, I mean, taking a look at what the character looked like in the cartoon, it's essentially the costume.
Yes, absolutely.
And animation style and all, they get that much is pretty right. It's pretty menacing.
Yep, that show was pretty good at adapting the looks of the characters in the comics as they were in the early 80s.
Definitely, yeah.
Yep. And then once I began reading the comics, fast forwarding here to the early to mid 90s, I did. I learned about the Goblin legacy, and I learned about what a baleful influence he had been on Peter, and how he destroyed him multiple lives, his own included, but Gwen Stacy's, and just dealt severe blows to Peter, and how he's kind of been looming over Peter and haunting him, most notably in the form of the twisted legacy he passed on to his son Harry. Because at the time when I started reading, Harry was active as the Green Goblin, on and off, kind of as Norman had been before him. He would reform for a while, and then he would kind of relapse. So his role as the Goblin was kind of like a metaphor for drug use from the very beginning, as we'll see as we go through some of these spotlighted issues today. But then when he made his return, it was not great. I agree with you, Ian. It's they've gotten some good stories out of it over the decades that have followed.
I think they did,
but to me at least, and I'm sure to quite a few other fans of the time, Norman was one of those sacred cow deaths that just was better off left alone and not being reversed.
I'm sure I've referenced it before on the show, but there's this excellent series of essays online called The Life of Riley, which goes through the history of the Clone Saga and the twists and turns and what could have potentially been the actual villain behind the Clone Saga. And Norman was quite literally the last choice. They wanted it to be Harry for most of it. And then there was even a possibility of it being like a time travel thing where Ben was actually a future version of Peter that somehow got blasted back in time. They went through every other choice and then eventually finally came back on, let's just make it Norman. He hasn't been around in a while. And you could tell by those issues that it was kind of slapdash like that because it was never an arc. He didn't actually get an arc until way later on. When Paul Jenkins was doing the great stuff he was doing on Spider-Man, JMS, all that. Well, even though the original Sin, or whatever it was called, with the Gwen Stacy kids.
Oh Lord, the Stacy twins.
Yeah. We'll talk about that in a little bit.
I know, but
that's a different spotlight altogether.
Norman had a much better place in Marvel Comics way after he was reintroduced, and I'll just...
Well, they made him like a universe-spanning villain, basically. Like, he became a major power broker.
I'm gonna call it Hammer. What does it stand for? We'll figure that out later.
All right. So for me, well, again, the Green Goblin is a villain that has captured my imagination since I was a little boy. My first exposure to the character would have been reruns of the 1967 cartoon, which
3 different generations of cartoon viewership.
Yes, which was when I was a little kid in the well, in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, they would play that show all the time after school. I want to say again on WPIX 11.
11 alive.
Mert, I was counting on that.
Yes.
Thanks, buddy.
And now I just have the Indiana Jones theme stuck in my head again from those commercials. Chased by bad guys, chased by rocks.
Levy Poo is clutch with the image. And I mean, I was a little kid, but I love the jack-o'-lanterns, the look, and I was already a fan of monsters and all that type of thing. Yep. So the look captivated me. Now, as I started to read the comics, I got, for one Christmas, Bring on the Bad Guys. So again, we've talked many times about the Fireside published books that Stan Lee would write. And these are some of the earliest sort of Marvel reprint books that were available, where they put individual issues, usually the first appearance or origin, and then a supplemental story after that. And again, Lee would write these charming, witty little essays, which were, again, I emphasize his version of how the Marvel Universe was born. And Bring on the Bad Guys, they had a Green Goblin story. Well, I only knew from the cartoon at that point. Mm-hmm. And they didn't put his first appearance in there, the Ditko issue, which I think is interesting now as I think about it, but they put in the one we're going to talk about with John Romita Sr., where Norman's identity is revealed as the Goblin. And I was completely taken with the idea that Spider-Man's arch nemesis was also the father of his roommate and best friend. And that really just grabbed my imagination, and I love the look. And as I was reading more and more books, primarily in reprints like Marvel Tales and so forth, I kept hearing about Gwen and how Gwen has been killed. I'm like, who's Gwen? And it took me a while to actually find this, again, before trades, the Marvel Tales that reprinted the death of Gwen Stacy. Then I was like, oh, wow, this is why the Goblin is really so important.
Yeah.
And I've devoured or gobbled every appearance of the character since, and I've come to really appreciate how important the Green Goblin is in the history of the Spider-Man character, in the Spider-Man character's world, and in the right hands, how truly terrifying a villain the Green Goblin is. I remember when we had Dan Gavazdan on, we did our micro spotlights from the Amazing Spider-Man Talk podcast. He talked about how he feels Norman Osborn is one of the most evil of all the Marvel villains, and I would agree with that, because the things he does, both to himself, to his own family, and to, as Merd mentioned, to people in Peter Parker's world, is so horrifying. And like Merd mentioned how, you're right, in the 90s, Harry was the Goblin. Yeah. Like, he kept reappearing as the Goblin, sometimes benevolently, sometimes malevolently. But Spectacular Spider-Man 200, which is beyond the scope of this particular spotlight, where Harry is killed, where he heroically tries to sort of redeem himself.
It's beautiful.
That's one of the greatest Spider-Man stories, I think, of all time. And again, it speaks to the resonance, the power of the Green Goblin concept as a villain in the Spider-Man universe. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion.
Absolutely. Here.
So,
yep.
So where I wanted to start, I was doing research. Now, this episode was pretty easy for me to do, because a lot of this I already kind of knew because I've read so many stories. But I'm thinking, all right, we always hear the story, always from Stan Lee or people around him, that who the Green Goblin was going to be was a sticking point between him and Steve Ditko. And you always would read in fanzines, journals and so forth, that you'd always hear this assertion that Steve Ditko quit in part, left Marvel in 66, I want to say, because he wanted the Green Goblin to just be some nobody that no one would actually know. Yeah. Whereas Stan wanted to be somebody the readers knew, so there would be, dramatic impact to that. And as I'm doing my research, I'm thinking, all right, I've always heard that, but is that really true? Because, we get reams and reams and reams of Stan Lee testimonials, obviously, about the Marvel Universe, its history.
And each one is different.
Yes. And whereas Steve Ditko, he has given some interviews to, like, more esoteric, like fanzines. Like, you'd rarely see him give some major interview for, because I don't even know if he ever even did, and on a bigger publication. Yeah. But there are things out there. I remember my friend John Paul, who runs the New Jersey Comic Book Shows.com. One time he got from some customer or fan a letter Ditko wrote by hand, where he was declining to appear at a con. It was like a couple sentences, like very polite, like I'm just not going to show up, something like that. But so I'm like, all right, is that really what happened? Because Stanley, by his own admission, many times has a terrible memory, and we're not talking about stuff that happened, 50, 60, 70 years ago.
Of course.
So I said, all right, let's go online, and I just did a little bit of searching, and actually within seconds, stuff comes. I want to credit 2 sites that are really helpful here. So Brian Cronin's Comic Book Legends page from CBR, issue 400 from 2013, and elvingsmusings.wordpress.com from 2021. Both have excellent essays with primary source quotes about this topic. And what's great about them, and I haven't read these stories in so long, I'd kind of forgotten, they take panels from the Ditko era, and they kind of array them chronologically with explanations, and they show you how Ditko was inserting Norman Osborn before he was even named as a character in the background in different stories, like a Jonah's Executive Club, as I mentioned, for example. And let me read some. Let me go to the quotes here. So here's Stanley. So this is from my original source, Bring on the Bad Guys, my beloved copy from 1976. So this is the intro to the Goblin chapter.
Yeah.
So imagine Stan's voice with all the enthusiasm.
Excelsior!
The Goblin has always been a favorite of mine because he is so extremely offbeat. In the beginning, we didn't know who he'd turn out to be when he was finally unmasked. But instead of making him some ordinary crook or scheming criminal mastermind, I was intrigued with the notion of his being an everyday, in quotes, good guy, and even better than that, someone very close to Peter Parker's best friend, of course meaning Harry. It suited my own sense of dramatic structure. When you get situations in which the hero and his friends and his relatives and their relatives are star-crossed by destiny, the story becomes far more absorbing, far more personal than any mere tale of the interaction of strangers could ever be. That's Bring on the Bad Guys, 1976. Now, let's go further. Jump ahead to 1995. Nearly 20 years later, Stan's introduction to the wonderful Spider-Man versus Green Goblin trade that reprints several key Goblin stories, including Spectacular Spider-Man 200. This is from 1995. Now listen to this. When Steve and I first unleashed him upon our woebegone web-slinger, now again, the gentlemen in the room know how I talk and how I will use words like woebegone with a straight face.
Oh, I know.
Here's why, okay?
Yes.
We hadn't the slightest idea who the Goblin would turn out to be. There was no brilliant master plan that we were following. Fighting never-ending deadlines as we did, we never had time to cook one up. It was only after months of goblinating, Stan,
Goblinating,
that we one day, I miss him, that we one day turned to each other and said, hey, when he's finally unmasked, who should he turn out to be? And you know something? To this day, I can't remember whether it was Steve or I who decided to make him Harry Osborn's father. Of course, if you like the idea of him being Mr. Osborn, the idea was mine. If you don't, blame Steve. Okay, now.
I don't think I will.
Now, so I did my just a few minutes research. So these quotes come up from the sites I just mentioned. And I remember this journal, The Comics. I don't know if it's still being published, honestly. So, again, Ditko was known to give interviews once in a while to fanzines, small press stuff like that. So here's Ditko discussing the same topic.
Oh, boy.
Now, listen to what he says. This is fabulous.
No.
I knew from day one, from the first Green Goblin story, who the Green Goblin would be. I absolutely knew because I planted him in J. Jonah Jameson's Businessman's Club, is where JJJ and the Green Goblin will be seen together. I planted them together in other stories the Green Goblin would not appear in costume. I wanted JJJ's and the Green Goblin's lives to mix for later story drama involving more than just 2 characters. I planted the Green Goblin's son, and he says parenthetically, same distinctive hairstyle, in the college issues for more dramatic involvement and storyline consequences. So how could there be any doubt or dispute about who the Green Goblin turned out to be when unmasked? So, now, I'm not bringing this up to pick a fight. I mean, both these men are obviously now deceased.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying one of them is lying, because I don't know. What I will say, because Ian's put up on the screen, if you're watching this at home on the YouTube channel, panels from early appearances of Norman Osborn. Now, if you look at the top panel, that's clearly Norman Osborn.
Yes,
it's
it
him.
is. Yeah.
It's the hairstyle. He's not speaking. He's just in the background of Jonah's Club, which we would visit many times in the early Silver Age stories. So that seems to lead credence to what Ditko is saying. I also should point out that two things. One, and again, this is well documented, Stanley's memory is awful. And Stanley was also a wonderful showman, carnival barker, So is he misremembering? Perhaps. What we do know for sure, because there's so many sources that document this, is that Steve Ditko was heavily involved in plotting many of the issues he drew.
Indeed, and as was even mentioned on the title page of some of the issues that I was reading, it's a plot and art. Steve Ditko.
Again, we've talked about the Marvel method many times in this program. Most of our listeners are familiar with that. Again, if you're not, just quickly, Stanley was, he was an editor, art director, head writer, and Marvel was first aborning. That's a hell of a load. So he came up with the method of, he'd tell the artists, all of whom were, you had Kirby, you had Ditko, you had Don Heck, you had Romita Sr., Colin, run down the list, right? Buscema, all masters. He'd say, okay, this issue, the FF fight Dr. Doom, go. Right? I mean, maybe a little bit more, and that was it. And then he'd trust these masters to plot out the whole thing. He'd go back, put in the dialogue, the captions, the thought balloons, which, of course, is his utterly priceless contribution to these stories. That's the voice of the characters. So it stands to reason that's very likely that what Ditko is saying probably is what happened, because he was the one plotting, especially because these are later in his run. These like in the 20s and the 30s. Remember, his last issue of Amazing Spider-Man is 38. So it's very likely that if he's taking the time to insert Osborn in these, without even his name yet in these stories, that he's doing that for a reason.
Absolutely.
Okay? Yeah. And I just found that fascinating, because I'd always heard over the years, well, he quit because he didn't like the fact that they were going to make, he wanted the Green Goblin just to be nobody and make it more realistic. And that very likely may not be the. I just find it's interesting. It's just an interesting bit of the history.
And frankly, this is the type of did they or didn't they that happens with time everywhere.
Absolutely.
But it's all over the comic book industry. The actual truths behind who created what are lost for so many characters. Or for years, we didn't know the truth,
Yep. We may never know in some cases.
So, all the Bob Kane stuff with Batman. For years, people thought, well, Bob Kane created it all, and then not so much.
I have to admit, and
exactly.
I've said this in the air in the past, that's one of the, that makes my blood boil, that story. It really does.
It truly does. In this instance, though, I am 100% with you that Stan was a carnival barker, oftentimes a bullshit artist, but I feel like it was never, at least in this situation, intentional, taking credit or not taking credit, because he probably didn't even remember it. He was like,
very possible.
All right.
And if you read the background, because it's just, again, the history of early history of Marvel is really fascinating.
Yeah.
Again, check out, what is it? Marvel: The Untold Tales?
Yes.
What's that book? That's a wonderful book.
Yeah.
The author was on the show.
Yes.
It's the Untold Story, right?
I believe so.
Yeah,
yes.
Marvel: The Untold Story.
Is it Pierre Comtois? Is that the guy?
I'm forgetting, but we can easily find that out. But what also really captured my imagination about this story or this background is that, think about how many times, like in history or in politics, people just assume something is true because it's been kind of
Howe, by the way.
Steve Howe, thank you.
Yep.
It's been repeated so many times, like this figure did this, and everybody assumes, well, that's what happened. And so many times that's not what happened at all.
Exactly.
Or it's incomplete, or it's a version.
Yeah.
And that just fascinates me. And if you go behind the scenes, it's widely documented that Ditko his latter tenure at Marvel wasn't even speaking to Stanley. He'd come in with his finished art, hand it in, and then he'd leave.
Yeah.
So clearly there was issues. Now, some people believe that a lot of what Ditko's concerns, like a lot of the artists, was a fact when it came to credit. Credit for the work, pay. Remember, Ditko was a staunch believer in Ayn Rand's objectivist philosophy.
Yeah.
Which I'm not going to go into here, but
for For more information on Steve Ditko, also head back into the archives with that excellent interview we did with Zach Crucy for his Ditko
Eisner-nominated book.
Indeed,
And then read that book.
Yes, 100%.
And also, what's it called? I think it's by Blake Bell. He did a wonderful biography of Ditko, which is I think it's by Fantagraphics. Ian's looking at it right now because Ian is Levinstein is L. Levinstein.
Strange and Stranger.
The World of Steve Ditko. Excellent book. Yep. So, fascinating. Now, here's Ditko talking about, this is from an interview. The first quote I gave was from 2009. This is earlier, also from To the Comics, Volume 12, Number 7, 2001. Stan's synopsis for the Green Goblin, so he's talking about the first appearance. You'll love this, Levy Poo. Had a movie crew on location, finding an Egyptian-like sarcophagus. Inside was an ancient mythological demon, the Green Goblin. He naturally came to life. On my own, I changed Stan's mythological demon into a human villain. I rejected Stan's idea. A mythological demon made the whole Peter Parker Spider-Man world a place where nothing is metaphysically impossible.
Agreed.
I think that was Stan slipping into his old like Atlas Comics monster and sci-fi story formula.
Although now I immediately think of later on in Spider lore where we had the whole spider totem thing and
that's true.
Moreland coming in and things got way more mythological, but that wasn't for many years until after Stan was writing.
I just find it interesting. Again, I'm not picking on one or the other.
No,
it's just the completely different points of view.
Oh, sure.
It's really interesting.
And I mean, not to bring it back to Batman again. I mean, the original Batman costume versus what we got. The original sketches for that. Workshopping happens for a reason.
Yeah.
Let's just put it that way.
Good point.
And we can even go back to Spider-Man himself. The original Kirby cover for Spider-Man. Or at least
that's right
for Amazing Fantasy 15.
Exactly, for Amazing Fantasy 15.
Well, the Ditko cover, which you can find online, which Stan felt wasn't dramatic enough.
Exactly.
And then he had Kirby come in, excuse me, and redo it.
Yep. So
I like both covers. Frankly.
Yeah, they're all dynamic. Yeah.
But by the way, I just think it's vintage Ditko. That last line, a place where nothing is metaphysically impossible.
Yes.
It's just. I mean, I'm not an expert in Ditko. I've read a lot about him, but I'm in no way would I consider myself an expert. But that just seeps Steve Ditko.
Definitely.
Essentially.
Yep.
Now, here's this last quote I want to read is a different perspective, but a very important one, which is Roy Thomas. So, this is an interview he gave in Alter Ego number 50, 2005. By the way, if you want to read a tremendous interview about the early years of Marvel from someone who was there. So Alter Ego 50 covers Thomas's entire 1960s career at Marvel Comics. It's a fascinating interview back in 2005. So he's being asked about the lead Ditko dynamic. And when we talk about when he says Saul, he means Saul Brodsky, who was he was like Lee's other right hand man. He was like the production manager.
Right.
He also did some inking. He designed some of the title logos. Also, a very important figure. This is Roy speaking. Saul told me they, meaning Lee and Ditko, argue about plot lines. I heard from either Saul or Stan, for instance, that Steven wanted a major character to be crossing the street and get killed by a car. Stan nixed that idea because it didn't seem like drama to him. Go back to the quote read before from Stan about drama. Yeah. Even though it was realistic. I know Stan felt the Green Goblin should turn out to be somebody important to Spider-Man. He didn't want to repeat that bit with the man in the Crime Master's mask. This is now Chris speaking. That's ASM 27, where the Crime Master, who has now since returned in Spider-Man comics, he's been back more than once, is killed. And when his mask is revealed, Spider-Man just goes, "I don't know who this guy is. He's just nobody." So I'll read this again. He didn't want to repeat that bit with the man in the Crime Master's mask, who turned out to be some nobody. I don't know if that had been Stan's idea or Steve's, but I know that as a reader, I'd found it dramatically unfulfilling. Still, I appreciated the realism. Just because you take off a guy's mask doesn't mean you're going to recognize him. This shows that Stan and Steve were thinking increasingly differently. Stan was doing quite well editing and writing a whole line of comics, and Ditko was feeling his oats too, because he knew he was doing good work, and people were responding to it. Certainly Stan liked it. Everybody liked it. Yet Ditko felt he and Stan weren't on the same wavelength. He was probably right. So it's just... partnership is hard.
Yeah. Yes.
And... if you read about Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, I can't think of two more diametrically different personalities who worked in the golden age, so to speak, of the comic book medium. and I don't in any way mean this as a put down. It's just, when Steve Ditko passed a couple of years ago, he passed exactly as you knew he would. He was found days later in his apartment, right?
Yeah.
Where Stan Lee, and it was part of his job, he said, Ian, he was the master at promotion.
Oh, absolutely.
And when you have someone who must talk constantly and get across, what they want people, why they want people to buy these books, how great they are, versus someone who is, clearly highly principled about what he's doing and very reclusive, that's probably not going to be a match made in heaven.
No, yeah.
And go ahead, Murray, you want to say something?
No, it was for a while, but it just...
as I was about to say, it wasn't built to last, but as long as it went, we have some of the greatest comics ever put to page. And furthermore, and I think this should never be overlooked, think about the Rogues Gallery Steve Ditko designed in a few years.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, some people will say, and many would agree, Batman has the greatest Rogues Gallery in comics.
Spider-Man's right after him.
Spider-Man is right after him, if not right up there with him.
Agreed.
I mean, and when you talk about like totem-like characters, a lot of that goes back to these Ditko designs, right? When you think about the Vulture,
That's true.
Kraven the Hunter.
Yep.
It's an amazing Rogues, and to me, the Goblin is I mean, the design of the Goblin's costume, it's really the same right through today. They made him more armored in some ways and stuff like that, but it's really the same design. It speaks to the strength
Pretty much.
of that design. And for me, what's always the creepiest aspect are the eyes.
Oh, my God. Yeah.
Because, and as you read more and more of the stories and you realize like it's Norman and who he is and so forth, what I personally have always found so frightening about the Green Goblin is it's just a guy.
Yeah.
It's just a man who is completely insane.
And I'll tell you what, you mentioned the eyes, and one of the main things about that, along with what you're saying, is that it's just a guy. Is that how many villains do you know where it's just whites?
Yeah.
Where you don't see anything because they're wearing a mask. Just whites of the eyes, or they're wearing glasses, or they're wearing goggles. Like with him, you see through to the man underneath the mask.
And
you
also
see the irises, you see the dilated pupils.
and it's his teeth too.
Yeah.
Like the snarl, and it's a frightening design. Ditko. I mean, when you look at Ditko's work, I mean, obviously Marvel, Charlton, War, and all the different work he did. I mean, when you talk about a master of atmosphere, of creepiness, the Atlas stuff he did, which Stanley worked on with him as well.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a guy who knew how to draw atmosphere, and he also, and one of the reasons I love his work so much, he drew people as they really tend to appear, often ugly or nondescript, or just, they're just people.
Yeah.
And then when you contrast to these just striking villains he would design, what a master!
Absolutely.
And to me, the Goblin is one of the greatest of all of his visual creations.
And it's why he's essentially, Spider-Man's Joker.
Yeah.
Very few other villains. I mean, even though they have the Rogues Gallery that they do, there's very few villains you can go back to and be like, this is the diametrically opposed yet just as powerful in many ways version of Spider-Man.
Well put.
Yeah.
Same case can be made for Dr. Octopus, just to be that guy.
You're very right.
Many would consider Doc Ock as arch nemesis.
They are
That's
one.
true.
They are
Yeah.
1 and 2.
Yeah.
Flip it and reverse it. Either way.
And I thought
Spidey is a coin with at least two different obverse sides.
Very, very good point. Yep.
I have to pause for a minute because I'm getting overwhelmed with emotion. Being in this room
Yeah.
with these men making these types of observations, this is, ladies and gentlemen, this is why I got up this morning, knowing, first of all, to have the trek with Levinstein in the car.
Yep. And that ceremonial trip to Wawa is just what just brings it all forward. It's what brings it all forward.
Able to participate in that sacrament
That's very true.
The serendipitous mode of meeting Murd in Wawa.
I walked in, I found the guys there when I didn't think they'd get here for
Gentlemen,
another 20 minutes.
I'm going to take a swig of my Wawa cranberry juice.
There you go.
Or artificial cranberry juice.
Uh-huh.
I think there's some actual juice in there. Maybe
Contains 2%, I guarantee you. Yep.
I'm looking right now, 25% cranberry.
Not bad. Not bad. Not too
Wawa's
shabby.
Now-
surprising us.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to point out, because you reminded me of this, Ian,
Yeah.
and Murd and you both, in the last Spider-Man movie, it was great seeing the Goblin and Doc Ock both in it,
Yes, that's true.
right? I thought that was exciting, and I've always hemmed and hawed about this, going back to the costume. And I'm glad they didn't emphasize the movie costume too much in the new film. They just put him in the purple and green
Yeah.
clothing,
Sweatshirt
essentially.
kinda.
Yeah. because again, I always go back to I think they really missed the boat when they designed the movie body armor, let's call it, because the mask didn't capture the madness and the terror of the Green Goblin. I know you're going to go to that image like what they originally were going to do, which is so much better.
I agree.
This is the original design.
The solid fright mask just was nowhere near expressive enough.
Yep. Yeah. No. This version that they almost went with is it just would have been so much creepier and
because it's a man.
Worked. Exactly.
It's
the only thing you wouldn't see is his eyes, like we were mentioning.
But the mouth, it's just my pet peeve.
Yeah.
But so let's piggyback from the cause. Let's talk about the Goblin's powers. So. We all know about the accident with the Goblin formula. So Mendel Strom, who those who remember the movie remember that he was the
back to formula.
Willem Dafoe was so good.
Nice.
He's like the sad sack scientist who's trying to keep Norman on the straight and narrow. Now in the comic, he's a more sinister figure. So he turns out he was embezzling money from Oscorp, and Norman, and I'm going to emphasize as we move along, the Norman Osborn in the comic before the Green Goblin was not a nice guy.
No,
at all.
He was not.
So we'll get in. It wasn't like he just became the Green Goblin, suddenly was evil.
Oh, yeah.
He already had serious issues.
Yeah.
So Strom is arrested. He's out of the picture. Norman's going through his files, and he comes across this formula. And Osborn himself is a brilliant scientist. So he has an aptitude for science, for chemistry, engineering, and so forth, so he can understand this stuff. And he is mucking with the formula and explodes in his face. And what I want to emphasize is Osborn is already mentally unbalanced before all of this actually happens. Again, a lot of this is, of course, retconning. Yeah. So we find out that he was already a ruthless, relentless figure, unbridled ambition, a lust for power. He had an aptitude for like corporate intrigue and strategy. Not a nice guy. And, of course, a very neglectful father, which we'll talk about. So not a Boy Scout. The formula explodes, and he's already unbalanced, and this only heightens, the madness within and that relentless drive for power and conquest and so forth. And it, of course, gives him, superhuman strength. Remember, the Goblin can go toe-to-toe with Spider-Man and not die. Right, they can trade blows, and so that doesn't kill him. So,
do you remember where we got this origin originally? Just out of curiosity.
It's in Spider-Man 3940.
Okay, there we go. Yeah,
which we'll talk about. Yep.
There we go.
And it's been elaborated upon
Yes.
since then, which I'll get into. So his speed, his stamina, durability, like his ability to take a punch, agility, reflexes, they're all to superhuman levels because of this accident. For example, I mentioned in The Pulse. Remember the Bendis Mark Bagley comic, The Pulse? Was excellent. Norman is threatening, I think he's threatening Jessica Jones, I want to say. And Luke Cage just beats the crap out of him. And it's actually the first time Norman Osborn, I think, is actually arrested. And he survives it. Like, he's not killed. So if he can withstand being a beatdown from Cage, that shows you the potency of the formula. Now, we're going to do a lot of retro content. Retcon alert number 1. The formula also gives Norman a healing factor.
Yes.
Now, as Ian mentioned, when Norman is impaled by his own glider in Amazing Spider-Man 122...
He got better.
Yeah, so, and then we saw that in the movie version as well. He's dead for, 20 years? About that?
Yeah.
So
he's believed dead.
Yes,
I think later we're told that he reawakened in a morgue not long after that, but he just buggers off to Europe so quickly.
Right, so...
And no one ever recognizes you in Europe. So
no,
that's
not even with the cornrows.
Exactly.
So, as far as readers know, for that whole period, Bronze Age into the Copper Age and on, Norman's gone. Harry becomes the Goblin, has his trials and tribulations and so forth.
Yeah.
So when Norman reappears at the climax of the Clone Saga, which Ian just mentioned, I can visualize the panel. He's dramatically ripping off his shirt, bare-chested, and he's ripped, and you have a huge cross scar on his torso from where he was impaled by his own glider. So
it's pretty great.
Apparently the formula also provides a healing factor. It's hard for Norman to actually die.
Yeah.
Retcon warning number 1. Okay. So those are his powers. Now again, as I mentioned, before he's even the Green Goblin, he's like a skilled corporate raider, brilliant scientist, massive ambition, ego, a ruthless figure, and again, not a Boy Scout, not a nice guy. And even in the Ditko stories, they go into that in some degree. So just bear that in mind. Now, well, you know what? I forgot to put it here. I'll just note it from my head. We should also mention his weaponry.
Ah, yes.
So I forgot to include that in my notes.
Yep, his famous satchel of tricks.
Yeah, the bag of tricks. So obviously the most famous is the glider itself. Now, Ian, of course, is a real big fan of the broomstick glider.
Oh, yes, absolutely, yes.
Which has only one appearance, at least in terms of continuity.
How do you even steer that thing? It just. I'm sorry. It just makes no sense.
Why don't you bring up the cover to Spidey 14?
Yep, yeah, let me get that.
So that's the first glider, which he uses as his conveyance. And then, of course, in his second appearance in Amazing Spider-Man 17, the glider we all know and love. And really, more or less, that's been the design ever since. They soup it up with more tech and stuff, but it's basically the same concept. So again, that speaks to the power of Ditko's design. So the glider, and as Murd mentioned, we have the bag of tricks. Now, of course, the most famous weapon, actually it's a whole variety of them, is the pumpkin bomb. The jack-o'-lantern. Murd, do you have any comments on the bag of tricks?
In general, not really. I mean, it's impressive he's able to keep it all as compact and miniaturized enough as he is that he can just keep it in basically a shoulder bag.
Yeah.
All these years, but yeah, I like the iconography that everything seems to be shaped like some kind of image that has to do with Halloween.
I knew you'd love that. Yep.
Yes, the jack-o'-lantern bombs and the razor bats.
Yep.
And
like the globby, like phantasm.
Yeah, the
bomb.
ghost grabbers.
Ghost grabbers. Yep.
And my favorite, the thing that I'm most looking forward to mentioning here, this is the problem with writing notes a millimeter high. You have to squint at them very carefully to find what you're about to talk about. Yes, but in his second appearance, he uses a toy frog.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Yep.
He has an electronic toy frog to cut Spider-Man's web line. That one didn't catch on as much.
I'm not surprised.
But the testament to Sam Raimi's greatness as a director, one of my favorite moments. Oh, Ian has the broomstick up right now. Mm-hmm. And then he has a contrast with the glider. Well done, sir.
Right between his legs.
Yeah. Indeed. Yep. Let me get that up for everybody here.
One of the great aspects of the Sam Raimi movie, one of my favorite moments is when the Goblin is pretending to be a woman trapped in a burning building.
Oh, yeah.
Complete with the shawl over his head. Which is a great kooky moment. Mm-hmm. And he throws the razor bats at Spider-Man. And I remember watching it the first time in 2002, and Raimi does the shot where they show Peter using his spider sense to avoid each bat. It was like
into bullet time.
Yeah, it was right out of the comic. I almost wanted to break down in like joyful sobs. It was so good.
Oh yeah.
But the weaponry, like the Goblin Blast, of course. So he has the microcircuitry in his gauntlets, which fire these like electrical bursts or beams at his victims. The pumpkins, of course, that you have like the typical like stun pumpkin. The explosive pumpkin. You have pumpkins that emit hallucinogenic gas. There's a whole variety. Like Murd said, somehow everything fits in that bag, and it all works. But what's great about the bag of tricks is any imaginative writer and artist can come up with a new weapon, right? But you're right, but it's always a Halloween theme, essentially, to add to his arsenal. So like there's the sparkle bursts. Yep. Great stuff.
And I think the hallucinogenic pumpkin bombs are my favorite. Just because
Spectacular Spider-Man magazine number 2, yeah.
Almost every single time that Spider-Man deals with anything that doesn't have an immediate explosion in these comics, he's like, well, I guess that one must have been Whoa. Why is the world suddenly spinning? Why am I seeing 7 goblins and all of my villains?
Oh, I'm so glad you're here. All right. Now, that's the Goblins. I mean, we've talked about his costume, the iconic aspects of his costume. I really loved, you mentioned before, the Paul Jenkins run.
Yes.
Humberto Ramos, I thought, draws a terrifying Green Goblin.
One of my favorites.
Because he takes the basic design and he just kind of amps up a bit with just like some armor on it, but it's really the same costume. It makes him even look more frightening.
He turns it into chainmail.
Yeah, exactly. And he has like, he shows like the the seams of like the fabric. Like it's a really good design. So look at that Alex Ross image. Oh,
Beautiful. Yep.
so that's the Green Goblin's weaponry, his look, and so forth. Now, any comments on those, gentlemen, before I move on weaponry or costume?
Yeah, the
Please.
ditko design is definitely classic, and I like well, the long stocking cap, the sleeveless jerkin, the little pointy-toed pixie boots. I mean, he seems to be inspired by like late 19th, early 20th century illustrators' conception of like brownies and elves and household spirits and things like that.
Chill. Go ahead.
But just extrapolated into for threatening effect. And it works. I mean, you wouldn't think that something that's so storybook cutesy could. I mean, even Stan Lee was aware of it when he wrote. I'm assuming he's the one who wrote the cover copy.
Yeah.
To number ASM number 17, where it says, "Do you think the Green Goblin looks cute? Does he make you want to smile? Well, forget about it."
I'll tell you what. To quote the Spider-Man movie, I'm kind of a scientist myself. And we see that in all of his weaponry. We see what he's able to do with Osborn money, to get all of the different weapons that the Goblin uses, a lot of which he himself designed, the gases and what have you. He works in chemicals, so clearly that all makes sense. And he's always innovating, just like you see Peter do with his own web shooters and what have you.
And that goes back to Murt's point about how the flip side of the same coin. right?
Absolutely.
And also one of the great themes of both in the film and in the comics, of course, is that in a twisted way, Norman sees Peter as the son he never had.
Right,
The son he should have had, essentially.
He's the bad father archetype.
Versus like, as he sees like his simpering son Harry.
Yeah.
So, fantastic, Levinstein. Let's talk about the origin.
Yes.
So, there's a lot of retcon alerts in here, ladies and gentlemen. All right, which is typical for many Marvel characters. So, apparently Norman's father was also an inventor, and he was a failed inventor, debts and so forth, and he was abusive towards his son.
Do we have a name for him? or-
Amberson.
Okay.
Sometimes some writers call him Ambrose, but
Okay.
I like Amberson.
Nice.
And apparently Amberson's grandfather, Alton Osborn, he was like a 19th century robber baron, and he's the one who amassed the family fortune, and Amberson is the one who nearly lost it all.
I love it.
You notice how the confidence I felt. I knew.
That bucket of ammo was on its way.
Oh,
because
yeah.
I didn't find a lot about the father. I'm like, it doesn't matter. Myrtle, no. And of course he did.
You're
so
right. You threw that with that pumpkin bomb, and he caught it. That's it. Yep.
he diffused it. All right.
Exactly.
Now, so Norman, and often like in real life, if someone's raised by an abusive parent or a parent who's in a lot of financial problems, that has an impact on the kid. And Norman is determined not to repeat his father's failure. So he wants to be wealthy and powerful and so forth. So he also goes to Empire State University and is a gifted student of chemistry, electrical engineering, and so forth. And that's where he meets Professor Mendel Strom. Look at that image of Norman's mind coming undone.
Beautiful.
Just sear that into your memory, folks.
Yep.
Because there'll be another image that kind of parallels to it later on.
Indeed. Yep.
So he becomes friends with Strom as one of his professors, and Strom obviously recognizes Osborn's genius, and they decide to go into business together, and they form Osborn Chemical, or Oscorp, with the financing from Norman's fortune, as Murd mentioned. Now, Norman, of course, married because Harry had a mother named Emily Lyman. Now, in the early Spider-Man stories, I am the Goblin, look at that. Issues 39 and 40, they do the backstory, and all you just assume that Mrs. Osborn is dead. Norman is a widower. Harry does not have a living mother. Now, retcon alert. We find out that Emily actually faked her death.
Okay.
Jumping all the way forward to Amazing Spider-Man number 800 for this one.
Nice.
I got to chill again. And because she saw the monster that Norman was and wanted to escape his orbit, so to speak. So she is not actually dead, but I forgot when she actually appears. Is it in that issue?
I think she'd been appearing under the guise of like a
nanny. She was a nanny.
Oh,
That's
okay.
right. Yes.
calling herself Emma.
To little Normie, right? To the grandson. Okay. Yep. So for much of the history, everybody assumes that she's dead. Okay. Now, this is a painful retcon for me coming up.
Painful retcons in comics? No, never.
But this one,
Yeah, whenever Mephisto pops up in the spider lore, it seems to end badly for everybody.
so
Is this a Nick Spencer retcon?
Yes.
Of course it is. Okay.
So it's volume 5, issue 72. So apparently, Osborn's on the verge of bankruptcy. This is back, in the beginning, right? And Mephisto comes to him. I write a big sigh in parentheses in my notes here.
we share that.
Yeah, and they make a deal. Mephisto says, look, if you give me your son's soul...
And a Formula One race car.
you will accumulate, massive wealth and power, which, of course, Norman's great heart's desire. And even better, after you make this deal, you won't remember it, so you won't feel bad anyway. So...
What's that Ditko was saying about a world where nothing is metaphysically impossible?
Yeah.
Murd, good callback.
Now we got the demon.
So, this... If you go by this retcon alert, first of all, this explains why Harry's life is so awful. And why he's had so many problems. Because, his soul was essentially given to the devil, or a version of the devil. And this also explains, if you want to go with it, why Norman, in part, is who he is and why he's pursuing what he's pursuing.
Right.
Here's my issue with this type of retro continuity. As a Spider-Man fan... I mean, I love Mephisto and Silver Surfer, for example, which is great stuff. But here, I just think about One More Day, and I just pull the blanket over my head.
Absolutely.
Furthermore, I think this type of plot device diminishes the evil of Osborn.
Yes. Right.
And how twisted and damaged he is. Like, the devil, like, come on.
Yeah, he's no longer just a guy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, he's now a guy with the devil in him and empowering him and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Exactly. I completely agree, Chris. It does devalue him.
I'll tell you what. I wish we'd gotten Nick Spencer's originally intended full run, because a lot of this you could tell was compromising and last second.
I'm not familiar. They made him cut it short?
Nick Spencer ended early. There have been multiple accounts, whether or not it was editorial interference or whether he just got tired of it or whether he wanted to just move on to Substack. But either way, Nick Spencer's run was supposed to go longer, and it didn't happen, which is why all this stuff happened within the last 5 issues of his run.
You mean like Norman becoming a good guy and all the Senator and all that stuff?
Exactly. Okay. Yeah. So
that's a trip, by the way.
Yeah. To say the least. Especially since I never got to that stuff in Spencer's run. So now in Wells' run, when all of a sudden I see good guy Norman Osborn, I'm like, okay, so clearly something happened.
We'll touch upon that.
Exactly.
So that's my take on that. Again, to be fair, Mephisto is latching upon the fact, he's exploring the fact that Norman already has these desires, these urges that are not going anywhere good.
Yes.
But I hate the whole devil made me do it thing. I've never been a big fan of that.
I agree entirely,
concept.
and it's not very Spider-Man, so yeah.
No. So anyway, back to the original story. So Strom was arrested for embezzlement. And Osborn now takes full control of Oscorp. And that's where we meet him in the Ditko stories when he's first introduced. First as the nameless executive in the background, then when he's actually introduced as Harry's father, we just know him as he's this powerful entrepreneur who runs this company who seems to have this shady side to him. Now, as we mentioned, he discovers the Goblin formula. Retcon alert again!
I feel like I should have something I'm playing every time this happens. But
So, Spectacular Spider-Man Annual 14, which I must have read this, but I don't remember it. So apparently, Harry as a kid, who Norman, at the very least, emotionally abused. Maybe he beat him too. They don't really clarify, but
I think this was part of the 1994 series of annuals of exploring the psyches of villains.
Okay, Murd would know. Ian's calling it up as God Levenstein.
Yep, here's the cover of that.
I remember that cover. So
Me too.
apparently, Harry as a kid snuck into Norman's lab because he's feeling angry and neglected. He futzed around with the formulas. So when Norman actually is experimenting, apparently the combination isn't what it should have been, and that's what causes this explosion. So in retro continuity, Harry creates the Green Goblin, essentially.
Not a big fan of that.
So nor am I, but I'm just giving you the whole history as it's presented to us.
Fair enough.
But
Fair
that's
enough. Although it is interesting though, if you do think about the the neglect and the
Kids do lash out when they're neglected.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
It's a cycle. It's a feedback.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah.
And I think one of the most powerful aspects of the Osborn story, when it's handled well, especially by J.M. DeMatteis, for example, in his classic Spectacular Spider-Man stories from the 90s, is the profound damage done to Harry by the abuse and neglect of his father.
Yeah.
Few people write better psychological
Dramas like that.
Well, yes. Well, deep dives into the psyches of villains.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Than DeMatteis, the father of Ravencroft.
Yes, and even in Amazing Spider-Man 39 and 40, which we'll cut to shortly, where they reveal the Goblin's identity for the first time, they show you that even in Lee's sort of more gentle hands, Norman is clearly not a good father. He's neglectful. He's not there. He's not present. Like there's scenes of him like, all right, Harry, I gotta go in a meeting. Here's like a bicycle to play with, that type of thing. Like giving him gifts to make up for the fact that he's absent all the time.
Here's $5. Go see a Star Wars.
Love it.
Thank you.
I've rarely even watched Arrested Development, but I know that.
Show's brilliant. All right, so let's go back to like the original continuity. So back in the Ditko period, what is the Green Goblin's first intention? Which I always found this very interesting. He wants to be the crime lord of New York City.
Yes.
So his goal is, in the first few appearances, his goal is to try to unite all the gangs under his control.
Yeah. So
the first few times he appears, especially in the 20s, he's trying to get these, like, that's where the crime master comes in, and so forth. And Spider-Man is always there to foil these attempts. Like Ian Wright has it up on the screen, issues 26 and 27. This is at the heart of the Goblin trying to form an alliance with the crime master again. It turned out to be nobody.
Yeah.
And to try to take control of the various gangs. So that was his initial scheme, which does not work out. Now what's interesting is in these stories, they often show the Goblin getting out of his costume. There's always like something blocking his face.
Yeah.
So you don't know who it is, but it's a guy putting on a suit. So it's someone who you assume is of some import or material. He has the screen again, right? Status and so forth, and someone who's out there in the city, waiting, preying upon Spider-Man. And again, I think this also gives credence to get Ditko's quotes that he always had an idea of who this character was going to be.
Yeah.
By the way, look at the image on the screen. Look how Ditko draws a man in a costume. Look how when he's taking the mantle off, how real that looks, right?
It's so beautiful.
Like the folds of the costume as he pulls the mask off.
And then the mask sitting by itself on the next panel. And it's still
frightening.
It's still frightening. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's great stuff. So let's go into some checklists, and we're going to talk about some individual issues that we all read prior to this recording. So here are some highlights. Some of these we'll talk about, some we'll just mention in passing. So, interestingly enough, this is a good retro continuity moment.
Ah, good.
Because the whole series was great retro continuity. Untold Tales of Spider-Man.
Yes.
Great one, wasn't it, Murray?
Every one of them was a great one.
Every one. So Kurt Busiek and the great Pat Olive on art. If listeners aren't familiar, this is a series. So I have a special fondness for this series because this is in the deepest, darkest pit of the 1990s in Marvel publishing. This is like Clone Saga stuff I was not a fan of.
Yeah, which, with apologies to some prison who got off on it, but it alienated a lot of older fans.
Yes.
And so this was kind of for them. This was a 99
cents, the only 99 cents line of comics they did.
Yep, and this was the only title in that line that's lasted very long.
The other one was a Fantastic Four title.
It was.
Fantastic Four Unlimited.
Fantastic Unlimited.
It was also for Marvel Edge, Over the Edge, and Under a Buck.
Ah, nice.
Did Spider-Girl start as 99 cents?
No.
I don't think so.
Okay, it did not. No, because it started as a what if.
That's right.
And then went on to that.
Okay, so this is one of our favorite writers in comics. I mean, no one knows the history of Marvel better. And what the series...
Busiek is a legend.
Yes. The premise of the series is it's during the Ditko era, but it's in between the issues that we already know.
Weaving in and out of established continuity.
Exactly.
From that
It's
time.
masterfully... Have you read this, Ian?
I've read bits of it.
Okay.
I've read maybe 5 issues of it, I think.
There's an omnibus.
Yes.
Which I think is still in print.
It's also all on Marvel Unlimited.
Okay.
So it's waiting for me, basically.
I'm showing my age again. You can just read it online. But it is essential. I highly recommend it.
Yeah.
Every issue is great. I had a lot of original artwork from it that was all destroyed in the flood that destroyed my first store, which still kills me. But in these stories, in issue 1, there are 2 villains who appeared, the Scorcher and the Headsman, who we realize are sent as proxies by Norman Osborn to kill Spider-Man so he can establish his bona fides with the criminal underworld.
Fascinating.
And of course, these proxies are defeated by Spider. This is teenage Spider-Man. This is high school Spider-Man. So then jump ahead to Amazing Spider-Man 14 in the original volume, where the Goblin first appears. And it is a bizarre story.
I still
just tell me what you think about it.
I still don't understand any of this. Like, I don't understand the motivation behind it. I don't understand why he got the idea to somehow create a movie plot with
Involving Spider-Man.
Involving Spider-Man and a washed-up movie maker who wanted to get another Oscar for. The name of it. Well, what was the name of the movie?
Remember.
It was
I don't know, The Return of the Creature from the Black.
Something like that. Like something that would clearly never have won an Oscar with a name like that.
And the Enforcers are there.
I'm thinking of an old Mr. Show sketch, The Return of the Curse of the Creature's Ghost.
Well, you're not too far from that there. And yeah, he convinces Spider-Man, oh no, I'm on the up and up. Here, I'm going to get you this role in a movie, so...
Come to New Mexico.
You come to New Mexico and make some money.
Yeah.
And then the Hulk shows up, and I still don't understand the plot. Oh, and there's a lot of teenage angst, that too.
Well, that's essential.
Clearly, because at the time there's a lot. There's even a Flash Thompson scene in that and everything. It's classic high school Spider-Man,
which is why those issues are so priceless in so many ways.
Exactly.
In terms of story enjoyment.
It's just not
it's
a good
New Mexico, as you said. They stumble into the Hulk's cave.
Yeah.
So because the Hulk is there, Spider-Man is eventually gets out of it. But what's important is that, as I mentioned before, at least for me as a reader, it's the first appearance of the Goblin. It's the look of the Goblin.
Oh, absolutely.
Which right from the get-go is so striking and captivating. But that's the first appearance. Like Ian said, we think about the Green Goblin as mythos. It's not really in this story.
No, it's not.
But what matters is the mystique, is the look.
Absolutely.
So, and again, you have to remember, Stan Lee was always an enthusiastic promoter of other characters and always having them appear, which was novel for the time period, right? Again, it's one of the things that made Marvel so special in the beginning in other books. So, like,
even just in passing.
Like, hey, there's Thor, right? Like, someone fly through exactly.
Which was some of my favorite stuff about the Inferno crossover. Actually, was that even during Inferno, you would see Spider-Man swinging by while everything was going to hell, or Thor being involved, so on and so forth.
Pure Marvel.
Yep.
Now, Amazing Spider-Man 17. First of all, I love this story because Flash Thompson has developed his fan club.
And everyone but Peter's invited to join.
Yep. Because remember, the great conceit here is Flash. He reviles puny Parker, as he would call him.
Yeah.
But he adores Spider-Man.
It's the no homers club of Spider-Mans. I'm sure there's probably a Peter in it, so it's a no Peters club.
Like, I'm reading from one of the panels. Here's Flash, being a lunkhead. He's the greatest guy in the world. He's talking about Spider-Man, and he's all heart. Flash hits his heart. He performed a circus for charity last month. He won't let his loyal fans down. And then Peter's thinking, the thought balloons. How can I ever be mad at a fella, such an early 60s term,
fella,
who feels that way about good old Spidey, even though he hates Peter Parker? Fantastic. Now, what I love about this, first of all, this is why these issues were so special.
Can you hold this up to the camera, by the way, just so that.
Yeah.
Well, I just want people to see how lovingly. I mean, it's hard to make out in the camera, but just this is such a excellent yellowed copy. I'm sure Shane would be smelling it right now.
Yeah, it's my old Spider-Man versus Green Goblin trade.
Spine lovingly creased in many places.
Oh, yeah.
There's the Human Torch appears. Now, this is an early example of that wonderful sort of love-hate rivalry between the Torch and Spider-Man that develops right from the really beginning of the Silver Age.
Definitely.
And the Human Torch shows up, and everybody's clamoring to get his autograph. And here's Johnny speaking to Peter. Hold it, fella. There's fella again. I noticed you hanging around. In case you're too shy to ask me, here's my autograph. Anyway, don't bother thanking me. I'm just all heart. Then Peter says, what am I supposed to do? Sleep with it under my pillow? Then a little kid runs by, Boy, this is my lucky day. Hey, did you get his autograph too? And then Peter's thinking, I might as well have some fun with this kid. No, this is Spider-Man's. Would you like to swap? What do you think I am, a nut? But Peter in the sweater vest, the tie, the jacket.
Yep.
Magnificent. Go ahead, Ian.
Such a classic J. Jonah Jameson image, by the way, on the page displayed here of JJ with the fist raised, like perfect JJ.
And what happens here is Spidey, and this now the Goblin has his classic glider now. This is his second appearance.
Yep.
And it's a great showcase of some of his weapons, the sparkle burst. There's the frog murd.
It's the frog.
So
Today's villains do not throw nearly enough toy frogs at heroes.
I agree. Yes. Yes. Needs more toy frog.
So, and it's a really, again, Ditko choreographs a great battle between the two of them, and then he shows the skills of both. But then Peter hears, this is classic, this is vintage Spidey. Aunt May is ill, and he has to get to her side. But if he leaves, it'll look like Spider-Man's a coward. And also the Human Torch intervenes, and Spider-Man is forced to flee, and Flash is just, he can't believe that Spider-Man has run away, essentially.
I did find an image of the frog, by the way.
There it is.
For anybody who needs to see it.
At last, my moment has come, he throws the frog. I can't believe it! He must have turned yellow! Poor Aunt May, I've got to reach the hospital fast. I pray that I'm not too late. So, then of course you have the classic Peter by Aunt May's bedside, clutching her hand. Wonderful. So, great early Spider-Man stories involving the Goblin. Now, Spider-Man 23, the Goblin pretends to help the police by trying to capture, is it Lucky Lobo a gangster?
Yes, he is.
Do you remember anything about him? I don't, personally.
He didn't live up to his name particularly.
Yeah, that's kind of all you really need to know about him.
Generic gangster.
Exactly.
There you go.
Yeah.
He's just kind of an arbitrary starting place for Norman's quest to make himself the king.
And to discredit Spider-Man, essentially. Yeah.
Just killing two birds, as it were.
And issue 27, which Ian had on the screen before, the Goblin tries to forge this alliance with the Crime Master, which does not work out. The Crime Master actually perishes. Yep. And again, we mentioned before the classic scene where Peter pulls his mask off, the Crime Master's mask. He's just like, I don't know who this guy is.
Nick Lucky Lewis, another Lucky who's not especially lucky.
Nice. It's kind of Spider-Man's Red Hood when you think about it, because like you know,
just a bunch of guys and a mask.
Exactly.
Because it's the Crime Master now.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep.
So,
and he dies. He knew who Norman was too. The two of them, as kind of a show of faith.
I forgot about that.
Revealed their identities to each other.
That's right.
And
well done, Murd.
But he had been shot by the police, and he kind of dies dramatically before
he can reveal the Goblin's identity. That's right.
It's kind of a Lone Ranger serial moment.
Yeah. Well done, sir. Well done. So, these are the Ditko Goblin appearances.
Yeah.
Now, go, Ian, if you could, go to the image. Go to Wrath of the Goblin, please. The image Wrath of the Goblin.
Yep. Excellent.
So if you're just listening at home, this is a classic Ditko image of, we know today it's Norman Osborn, but his face is in shadow, and he's holding the Goblin mask aloft, which, by the way, again, is really creepy.
Yeah.
And he's pledging to destroy Spider-Man. And I was doing some background reading, and again, quotes from Ditko. If you look at the silhouette of the head, apparently purposely emphasized the ridges in the hair. And knowing Ditko's detail, I believe that he meant this. That's very possible, to show that it was Norman Osborn. But again, the face is in shadow. Now, if you go also to the next image, let's see. Ne'er-do-well, Amazing Spider-Man 37, please, my friend.
Okay, ASM 37. Ne'er-do-well, here we are. Is that it?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Now, notice this is So Norman's now been introduced as Norman Osborn. So he's Harry's father. And remember, at this point, Peter went to college before Ditko left the book.
Yes.
Ditko introduces Gwen Stacy, for example. He introduces Harry Osborn. Professor Warren, I think, is also introduced.
Issue 31, all three of them in the same issue.
Yeah, so these characters have been established. Now we meet Harry's father. And it's not, Norman's good and the Goblin's bad. It's Jekyll and Hyde. Norman is also a shady character. And in these stories, they reveal that he's up to some shenanigans, and he's not necessarily somebody who you should take his face value as being, a good guy, so to speak. So, like he's saying here, he's thinking to himself, as Norman Osborn, Spider-Man almost ruined everything for me, but it won't happen again. Now that his suspicions have been aroused, he must be disposed of, as he clutches a firearm. So, again, interesting how the seeds are being laid. Now, if you go also to, where are we here? I'm sorry. Maybe it's, is it Machinations, Amazing Spider-Man 38.
Machinations.
Yeah, I'll read to those at home.
There we are. Is that, let's see, AMS 38. Here we go.
Yep.
Got it.
So, here's Osborn, again, not as the Green Goblin. The Green Goblin doesn't even appear in this story. He's now disguising himself in a false beard, glasses and a hat. Harry and Flash drop him off, and Flash is thinking, what a great guy Mr. Osborn is. Then Norman Osborn's thinking, I thought they'd never drive away. So he's meeting with underworld figures, right, to hire them to kill Spider-Man. So Norman Osborn is not on the up and up. And it's interesting. I'd forgotten about these stories until I read them in years, that Ditko and Lee are establishing that there's something wrong with this guy. There's something off about this character. Before we learn in the next issue, issue 39, that he, of course, is the Green Goblin. If you go to the cover for issue 40, please, my friend.
Excellent.
So let's talk about 39 and 40, because these are major issues in the history of the character. And these are, I should mention, 39 is the first issue penciled by John Romita Sr. So Ditko has left the book, and he's left Marvel completely. He left Strange Tales, Doctor Strange. He's gone. He goes to work to Charlton and other companies.
Yep.
And Romita Sr. comes on, and first of all, we should mention a little bit. We talked about this in our Spider-Man Spotlights way back in 2012, but the contrast between Ditko's design sense and Romita Sr.'s, I mean, it's completely different.
Night and day.
It's night and day.
Yeah.
But for me, both of them work.
Yes.
Yeah, they're just different. There's a different sense of style. Remember, Romita, is a master craftsman. I mean, he's one of the great masters of the genre.
Yeah.
He was a romance artist at DC for many years prior to this. And before that, in the 50s, he actually drew the commie smasher Captain America in the Atlas era.
He sure did.
So he was already a veteran, but he brings a more glamorous style to the world of Spider-Man. Where in the Ditko era, even Gwen, who Ditko obviously means her to be pretty, it's not like the Gwen Stacy you see.
Oh, absolutely.
Like when we think of Gwen Stacy, we think of the Romita design of the character.
Yeah. Romita's just better at drawing attractive women.
Definitely the case.
So, but what's interesting is that Romita does his own. Remember, Romita was also one of the great character designers for Marvel. Like in the 60s and 70s, he designed a lot of the characters that were introduced, a lot of the villains and so forth. And he takes on the Goblin, and to me, it's just as captivating. It's a different, like you got Ditko's Gwen Stacy, although Ditko does get credit for the hairband, versus the more swing and jazzy John Romita Gwen.
Yeah.
Great stuff there, Ian.
Yep.
So, but to be again, the designs are all Ditko though. Like that's where it all starts here.
Oh,
but
they totally are.
When you like, if you go to the cover for issue 40 again, I'm sorry. Look at the drama of that cover, of a triumphant Spider-Man standing over, a defeated Green Goblin. It's such a great image.
There you go. Yep.
The end of the Green Goblin. Now, so in these stories, this is the story I read in Bring on the Bad Guys. So it was one of my first experiences with the Green Goblin comics, probably my first actually. So, and this is one of the key elements of the entire Spider-Man history. Norman figures out who Spider-Man is.
Very, very important.
Yes.
And it kind of changes the entire dynamic.
Absolutely.
Not only between them, but also the comic itself.
Because now Peter has to live in terror constantly that his greatest enemy will strike out at him and his beloved Aunt May and Gwen and everybody else.
Even with, he doesn't remember anything.
But it could come back to him at any moment.
Exactly. Yep.
So he comes up with a gas, again, Murd referring to his gift as chemistry, right? He comes up with a gas that neutralizes, without Peter knowing, his spider sense. So the Goblin follows Spider-Man. He sees him take his costume off and realizes who he is. And then he goes to Aunt May's house. Hence the famous picture where we have of our figure of him trailing Peter, with the tied up with the. That's from issue 39.
Yep.
Right. There he is. So that was a terrible Green Goblin laugh. So in issue 40, at the end of 39. This is like, right out of like a James Bond film. Norman reveals his identity and explains his entire plan.
Before I kill you.
Yeah, exactly. So he has Peter tied up, and he has Peter like in these like metal coils, and classic splash page there. Classic splash page.
Yep.
Inking by Mickey DeMeo. Look at the Sam Rosen letterer, all Titans of the Silver Age. So
the end of the Green Goblin.
So Peter is trying. This is classic. I love when they have Spider-Man strategizing, and that's why I miss the thought balloon so much. Peter's thinking, okay, I got to keep him talking because he's clearly deranged. Well, if I can keep him talking long enough, I can use my spider strength to get out of these coils, essentially. And a lot of the issue is Norman, as Murd just lampooned.
Yep. Actually, I have in my notes, Norman Bondologues his origin.
Well put. Well put.
You know what Spider-Man doesn't use enough, and I meant to mention this when we were talking about the first issue with Green Goblin in it. He doesn't use his amazing spider chest nearly as much because as Mr. Stanley had to point out, using my amazing spider chest, I was able to get out of this situation. Clearly, had he used his amazing spider chest here, that wouldn't have been a problem. Just saying.
When did you get so cynical? God.
I'm just pointing out the amazing spider chest.
So this is the story. Issue 40 is where we get the basic Osborn origin.
Yeah.
So the neglect of Harry, his driving, relentless ambition to succeed, the formula blowing up, Strom being arrested from all that is in this issue. Essentially, they give you the whole backstory. It's all Lee and Romita Sr. And at the end, Peter's able to get free. And actually, no, Norman frees it because he wants to fight him one last time. And he says, put your costume on. I want to take you on as Spider-Man and all this. And they're battling, and Norman falls into, it's almost like the Flash, chemicals, saturated with, wires.
Yeah, there's live wires involved somehow.
Yeah. And the jolt sort of disorients Norman, and suddenly his mind goes back to when Harry is in high school. He's like, where's Harry? Where's my boy? He always say my boy. He needs help with his bio. And Peter's like, he thinks Harry's still in high school. The last several years have been erased. I'm paraphrasing. And, so he takes because there's a chemical fire is broken out, consuming this Osborn warehouse. We should mention, by the way, Norman was such a careful strategist. He would have hideouts throughout the city where he'd have caches of Green Goblin equipment so he could get it wherever he needed to go, essentially. And when we get to the Hobgoblin, all right, the great, sort of remake of the Green Goblin in the 80s, like the Spider-Man of the 80s as far as I'm concerned, that character, Roderick Kingsley, finds one of Norman Osborn's hideouts and then adapts the equipment for his own purposes.
Yeah.
So, and Ian has the panel up again, where Peter realizes that Norman doesn't remember the Green Goblin at all. So he takes the costume off, he throws it in the fire, he tells the police, the Green Goblin's dead, Norman Osborn's a hero, he helped me defeat the Green Goblin.
Yep.
And he thinks, all right, and then Norman's like, Harry, I'm going to be a better father and that type of thing.
And he was the end. That's it. It's all over from there. We never see the Green Goblin ever again.
God bless us, everyone.
But a few years later, so Spidey has other adventures, of course, many classic adventures. I should mention, as a longtime Spider-Man fan, the Lee Romita period is just one gem after another.
Oh, absolutely.
And this is where you really see the development of the gang, like the subplot characters, the college friends, all of that stuff, the coffee bean, all that mid to late 60s stuff we love. It's all in this period, essentially.
And I'll tell you, you do actually notice a difference in the issues. Now that I'm reading, I've read Lee Ditko and I've read Lee Romita, and the fact that Ditko was plotting, you can also tell a difference in the way the issues are written and play out. now that there's a different artist involved. And I think there's a certain sensibility that Romita brings that is significantly different.
How do you think it's different?
I think it's actually closer to today's comics in a certain way.
What do you mean by that?
Ditko was more cerebral, and we know that about him.
Yeah.
And even in the layout of the comics and in the plot that would move forward, it was very like, I don't know, like Act 1, Act 2 finale. In this, I feel like there's more of a drawing story. Like there's more.
Oh, you definitely have, without question. In this period, like when we did our micro spotlight with Dan about the Clay Tablet saga, which is from this time period.
Yes.
What was that? A 7-part story,
something like that.
Yeah. You see, and Marvel's doing this in a lot of their other titles. They're exploring more and more with the long-form, ongoing subplots.
Absolutely.
Stories that encompass several issues,
Yep.
and whether or not that was something that Lee and Romita wanted to do, or maybe the characters kind of drove them towards that as they developed those characters more.
Yeah.
I think that's a great point.
Yeah.
L. Levinstein.
Whether or not it's actually Romita, or whether or not it's just Lee evolving as a writer, or a little bit of A, a little bit of B, there is definitely a significant difference that I've noticed. So,
and we're now a good example of that is Spectacular Spider-Man magazine number 2, 1968. Now, if you could put that cover on the screen.
Absolutely, it's such a good cover. Even if this Marvel.com banner is even on the Marvel Unlimited.
So this is a John Romita Sr. Many people, if you're only listening to this, you've probably seen this image.
Oh, definitely.
It's the Green Goblin. Spider-Man's in the foreground, putting his arms up, trying to ward off a sparkle blast from the Goblin who's flying alongside him.
Yep. Yeah. They're battling in midair.
Yeah, it's a classic image, and what some people may not be aware of, there was a brief period in the late 60s where Lee was able to convince Marvel publisher Martin Goodman to try a magazine form, which Goodman was not very enthusiastic about. In fact, when we think about the classic Marvel black and white magazines of the 70s, of which there were many, that's after Goodman was basically I think he was pretty much gone or nearly gone from the company, and Lee was able to do a lot more. And he got editors like Marv Wolfman to work on a whole line of different magazines. This is well before. That's in the 70s. This is 1968. And Lee was always trying to broaden the audience for comics.
Yeah.
And to try to get more people to read comics. So remember, magazines were seen as something more sophisticated, so to speak. The format, how they were displayed, where they were displayed, and so forth.
And they didn't need code approval.
They didn't need code approval.
That's
exactly.
true. Yeah.
Like when we think about the classic Savage Tales #1.
First man thing.
Yep.
Yes.
From the early 1970s, which has a John Buscema painting of Conan holding a severed head up. No code there, ladies and gentlemen.
No.
So that's a little bit later on, but nothing like. Oh, go ahead, Ian. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, you can tell that there's no code in this, and also, this was my favorite issue of the bunch that we read.
I look forward to your reason in a moment.
This is absolutely one of my favorite Stan Lee comics that I've ever read.
I think I read a quote. I want to say it was Mark Waid, where he was talking about how this is one of his favorite Spider-Man stories of all time.
And I can understand why.
Basically. So basically, in the story, it's in continuity. It's not like it's just its own separate thing. Now, the first issue of the magazine was in black and white. And that introduced the character Schemer? No, Schemer was Richard Fisk.
Right.
It was the corrupt politician. I can't remember his. Damn it!
Richard Raleigh, the
Disruptor.
Disruptor.
Yes. That was a black and white story, which was actually later put in color later on into the Spider-Man comic.
Okay.
So what came out later. This is a color story, 1968. And in fact, if you look at the original issue, they have an ad for issue 3, the TV Terror, which never actually was published. Because Goodman pulled the plug on it. But
Okay.
this is one of my favorite Green Goblin stories.
Agreed.
So it opens. First of all, it's Romita art, Jim Mooney inking. Any Silver Age fans, your heartbeat should be racing right now. So that's a hell of a team. So remember, as Romita became more and more busy, because he also did all kinds of merch art for Marvel, promo art, character designs, covers, they would bring in other artists like the great John Buscema, Jim Mooney, and they would. Romita might do penciling, and they'd go over it, and he might just give some like breakdowns. They do the rest, so they were all involved. But this is Romita drawing clearly with Mooney finishing, inking, and it opens at again that infamous Executives Club that Jonah is a member of with Norman Osborn and also Captain Stacy, retired NYPD Gwen's father, who, of course, we know today always knew Peter was Spider-Man but kept a secret.
Yep.
And Stacy's giving a lecture, it's fabulous, on a criminologist lecture about Spider-Man and his duels with the Green Goblin. So this was not a good idea. So Norman invites, because he's got his amnesia, he's in his Dr. Jekyll moment, in a sense. He invites Harry and his best pal, Peter, to come to this lecture about himself, although he's not aware of it.
Yeah.
And you got it up right now. Fabulous. And this goes back to what Ian was talking about before. Peter is living in terror.
Oh, yeah.
And you're right, Ian. This adds a whole new dimension to the whole mythos.
Oh, absolutely.
That this guy's going to find out, remember who I am, and he's going to try to kill everybody I love, basically. So in this great double-page spread, there's Captain Spacey with his omnipresent pipe. Remember, it's the 60s, so all the older men have pipes all the time. Jamie D always loved Steve Rogers appearing with his pipe and his smoking jacket.
Oh, yeah.
Jonah's loving every minute of this as Spider-Man's being beaten up by the Goblin in the film. And Norman, beads of sweat appearing on his brow. Harry, as always, helpless and concerned. And Peter's like, oh, no.
What a use of color here, by the way.
Yeah, the coloring is beautiful. They don't give credit to the colorist.
So great.
Yeah, it's this, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to see like the quintessence of like later Silver Age Spider-Man art, this is the book to get.
100%.
It is absolutely gorgeous. So, sure enough, having been to this lecture, and there's a great page, I don't know if Ian can find it, where Norman collapses during the lecture, and Ramita draws in the background on the film screen this huge leering image of the Goblin gazing down at Norman as he collapses on the floor in paroxysms of panic and anxiety. It's fabulous. So there it is.
Yep. Got it.
Great cinematic style.
Oh, totally. And you can tell they're working with something special here in this magazine style, and that they're able to go all out, because I even feel like this is some of my favorite Ramita artwork, period.
And you're right, the coloring is
so beautiful.
Stunning. So Osborn ends up in the hospital, like, oh, he's just overworked. And I love this, because Captain Stacy, always the critical thinker, always really on Spider-Man's side, and he always would get Jonah's goat. And Jonah, when I realized, for example, here, this is Jonah speaking. If you ask me, Osborn's been working too hard. He needs a good vacation. And then Stacy, I think it's more than that, Jameson. He should seek psychiatric help. Balderdash! You never get me to head shrinker. And then Stacy says under his breath, too bad. What's that? Nothing. So, isn't Harry so helpless?
Yeah.
Like he just, when you think about the retro continuity, you realize how damaged he is by being Norman Osborn's son.
Can I also comment on how frail they make?
Yes,
They draw him in here, and
he's hunched in shadow.
He looks like a leaf could blow him over right now, and it really helps with exactly what you're talking about.
Yep. And then Peter's thinking, his memory mustn't return. It mustn't. Of course, it does return.
Yes, it does.
And and what I really love in this story is they emphasize his madness, and also how physically powerful he is. They talk about how he's like throws the doctor aside. He's like juggling furniture in his rage. I am the Goblin, and so forth. But what I love most about this issue, and I'm sure you're a big fan as well, Norman Osborn decides to have a dinner party.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Which is reminiscent to the Spider-Man movie.
Yes, the Thanksgiving scene.
Yes.
I guarantee Raimi was thinking of this.
Absolutely.
So he invites Harry and his, flighty girlfriend, Mary Jane, who never really was, I think, really that stuck on Harry personally, but she's with him. This is during Mary Jane's very brief perm period, by the way.
I hate that hair. I hate it so much.
It was there for a couple issues, then it was gone.
So glad that they got rid of it. It does not. For one thing, she's not recognizable.
She looks like Jane Fonda in the 80s. Like, I don't know. It's like 1968. Like, I don't know what they were thinking. But anyway. And then, of course, Peter brings Gwen. Now, I also think, by the way, this is an issue where we get more of a sense of Gwen as a character than other issues. She's witty. She and Peter are verbally, well, as Stanley calls it, verbally fencing. Yeah. She's sort of teasing about marriage. And you really feel the stress of Peter in these stories. Yeah. Like, he's like, how am I going to get out of this? And what I love, there's a great moment where they come to the Osborn, manor, and Norman shakes his hand, and Peter's thinking, he's toying with me, squeezing my hand hard enough to break my fingers if not for my spider strength. I have to play it his way till he makes his move. And they emphasize that Norman is charming, he's witty, which we don't often see in the comic, but it makes him even more dangerous, essentially, that he could be almost like an alluring figure, essentially. And then, of course, Peter excused himself. I forgot to call my aunt, because that's what any 19-year-old would do when they're at a dinner party. And he makes I love this, he makes a smoke bomb out of his webbing in the fireplace, because the webbing is not flammable, which creates a smoke effect. Norman's enraged, and they end up in battle. And this is where the psychedelic pumpkin comes in.
Good old psychedelic pumpkin.
I know you're going to bring up the image.
Yep, absolutely.
Because the image needs to be seen.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Ramita and Mooney have a field day here.
Oh, it's so... this is, I think, my favorite image of the entire book here, with the monsters.
The goblin leading this menagerie of horrifying creatures.
Yep.
I love the one-eyed demon, whatever that is. And then they show all of the other Spider-Man's rogues also being led by the goblin.
Yep.
But Peter figures it out, and ultimately he turns the psychedelic fumes on the goblin, which then creates the same effect where he loses conveniently his memory again, and he returns to being Norman Osborn.
Yep. And he was for the rest of time.
Go to the last page. What I love, though, is so they go to the hospital, and Harry's there to be with his father. And Mary Jane's like, well, we should all go out now, right? So, throw in a glitzy sundae and I'll listen all night. So they're going to... And Peter goes, I'll tell you my life story of a cup of job. They're going to go to the Coffee Bean. Groovy, Mr. P. That's Gwen. God, the 60s. But here's Peter thinking. That's it, Webhead. Keep a stiff upper chopper and always leave him laughing. Just as though you couldn't care less about whether the Green Goblin will ever return. And then Mary Jane saying, you must live right, Tiger. Here are 2 way-out chicks, not a care in the world. The little lady said, man of mine, let the good times roll. Yeah, why not let the good times roll? End story.
Yeah.
As they walk off into the sunrise, and permed Mary Jane starts singing, the sun'll come out tomorrow. Because she looks very much like Little Orphan Annie.
Yep.
So they never republished this in the main Spider-Man title?
This story they didn't. The first magazine they did.
Which is super funny, because you would think they would want to, because this is such an important story. Like, I feel like... I mean, and yes, I understand. It's in a special format. Like Stan.
But it is in continuity, though.
Oh no, absolutely. It's just for anybody who was a fan of it.
They reprinted it years later in an annual,
Okay,
like a king size special, one of those type of one shots.
Got it. It's just anybody at the time had to get the magazine.
You had to get the magazine.
Yeah. Wow.
If I remember correctly, I think in the monthly book, they do show a panel of Norman putting on the goblin costume, which I think, if I remember correctly, is a tie-in to this story.
Got it.
There was a bit of a build-up in ASM number 61, 62, and 63, where it was kind of hinted that his goblin memories may be returning.
Okay.
But meanwhile, Norman was actually acting semi-heroically, because that was the arc where the Kingpin was getting... he was muscling in on Osborn's facilities somehow, and he was also trying to frame Captain Stacy.
That's right.
And Osborn actually took steps to... get Kingpin out of there and to save George and Gwen from death and or defamation.
Yeah.
Clutch murder.
The cinematic nature of this story.
I'm glad you love this.
Is one of the reasons why it works so well for me, because it's gripping. It's gripping storytelling.
Yeah.
That's like page to page to page. I can hear the radio drama in my head as I'm flipping through it. It was terrific.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. Now, I'm putting up here Amazing Spider-Man. They didn't say annals, they just said 96.
Yeah.
Blast from the past. So, if you want to get another feel for this time period, they did an annual where they got Romita Sr. to come back. Well, he never left, but he wasn't obviously drawing Spider-Man on a regular basis.
Sure.
So it takes place when Ben Reilly is in the Spider-Man costume. So that's like the bookends of the issue.
He's wearing the Jurgens designed costume, and he's got the blonde dyed hair.
Yep, and he's thinking back to what we consider the Silver Age, which of course is a lot more recent for him. And it's Ron Friends being inked by John Romita Sr.
Wow.
So the art is gorgeous.
I can imagine.
And it's a story Oh, look at Mary Jane in the fringe jacket. Oh, it's like Easy Rider. So it's all the great tropes of that era.
Yeah.
Like there's a great scene where Robbie and Captain Stacy were allies are trying to figure out who is Spider-Man. And they're both suspicious. And the story's about it's an in between the panels type of story, in between the issues, like Untold Tales of Spider-Man was. And Norman hires Kraven the Hunter to go after Spider-Man. What's great about the issue is it reminds us of how insidious and sinister Norman was even when he was not the Green Goblin, essentially. But if you love Silver Age Spider, like especially the Romita period, definitely hunt down or just get online. Amazing Spider-Man 96, Blast from the Past. Oh, yeah. It's fantastic.
And I mean, even looking at this image, I mean, it's the sensibilities of the 90s mixed with the sensibilities of the 60s.
Yeah,
so
good point, sir.
Yeah.
Scroll down a bit to one of the flashback, the so-called flashback pages.
Let me see if I can find those, actually. Here we are.
There you are.
Yep.
So, like, look at Gwen. Look at the glasses, the coat. It's look at the Romita. Like, look at Harry, again looking woebegone.
Yep.
Mary Jane, like not a care in the world, or so we think.
Yeah.
It's right from that period.
It's so great.
So again, if you're not aware of that story, you haven't read this one, right?
I have not.
You should. No. You'll love it.
Yep. Excellent.
So that's another one I wanted to mention. Now, okay.
That's good.
Let's move on to the culmination.
Oh yeah.
So it's 1970. Richard Nixon declares the war on drugs in the early 70s, and there's a big debate in our country's sort of historical cycle as to whether or not that was a good thing or a bad thing, and the consequences of it. We're not going to get into that here; it's a different type of podcast. But the bottom line is, Nixon, for example, creates the Drug Enforcement Agency, the DEA. So there's this growing sense that drugs have become a problem in the United States. They need to be combated on a federal level. So Stan Lee receives a letter from the federal government. In fact, I got to show this on screen. This is one of the most cherished books from my library.
Ooh.
1979.
Wow.
The Amazing Spider-Man from Fireside. So Fireside did, in addition to the Origins books we've talked about, they did a series of books on specific characters where, again, Lee would write an essay and then have a series of reprints. They did one for Doctor Strange, Spider-Man, I want to say the Fantastic Four too. Not sure about that, but these are great. So I'm going to read from his introduction. Sometime in 1970, we received a letter from the Office of Health, Education, and Welfare in Washington, D.C. The gist of the message was that HEW was aware of the great influence Marvel had with the youth of America and wanted to request a favor of us. The favor, as you may have guessed, was to incorporate the dangers of drug addiction into one of our storylines, preferably the Spider-Man series, since Spidey was, and parenthetically still is, our most popular superhero. Now, let's talk about the code.
The code.
So, the Comics Code Authority. 1954. Murdy can jump in any time if there's anything you want to add to it. But the comic publishers in the United States decide they're going to self-censor themselves, and they create this advisory board that they're going to voluntarily submit their comics to.
All this in response to the moral panic that had blown up.
You want to talk about that a little bit? What's the source of that?
Yeah. Frederick Wortham's The Seduction of the Innocent, the tract about the...
Who was Frederick Wortham?
Well, he was a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a well-meaning...
child psychiatrist.
Yes,
right?
expert on youth psychiatry and specializing in juvenile delinquency and its causes. And he was pretty sure that comic books were a contributing factor.
Yeah.
So he meant well, but he misidentified some of the root causes.
And if you look into Seduction of the Innocent, I think there's passages where he's talking about like Dick Grayson's lying in bed next to Bruce Wayne and all this type of
like homoerotic content.
He's drawing all these.
He pointed out the presence of vases full of fresh flowers in Wayne Manor as a symptom of the homoerotic relationship between Bruce Wayne and his ward.
It was Aunt Harriet, damn it. Okay. But at the same time, though, building off of what you just said, Murray, it happens a lot in society. It's almost impossible for it not to happen, where somebody means well and then panic ensues.
Absolutely.
And this
That
was
again and
this
again.
was this to a T, if not more so.
Well, you can find old photographs online of like people burning comics and bonfires in different communities. I mean, the government had hearings about it.
Think of how much money they would have had they not done that.
But then maybe they wouldn't be worth as much.
That's true, right? Yeah, it's a very good point.
Who knows?
So, yeah, Wortham tended to focus more on crime and horror comics
Yes.
than superheroes. Though.
Yeah.
And it's widely believed that one of the reasons the big publishers, so obviously DC was like the Cadillac of comic book publishers in the 1950s. So DC, Atlas. What are some other big ones then?
Archie, or
Archie,
MLJ, I guess they still
yeah.
were at that time.
So they decide, you know what? Because there was actually hearings about this in Congress. They said, let's cut this off at the pass. We're going to censor ourselves, so the government won't get involved in what we're doing. Now, some historians believe that there's an opportunity to get rid of their chief competition, which was EC Comics, which, if you look at
yeah, the wording of the code itself.
No comic magazine shall use the words horror or terror in its title.
right now, Ian,
Like some of EC's bestsellers, The Crypt of Terror or Tales from the Crypt and
Haunt of Horror.
Vault of Horror.
Vault of
Yes.
Horror.
Haunt of Fear.
Haunt of Fear, right? So again, if you're not, Ian has on the screen now for those at home the key points of the CCA code that you weren't supposed to violate.
Let's focus on the one that I highlighted specifically for these drug issues because I feel like it actually is very important.
Well, what's interesting is that drugs are never specifically mentioned.
Exactly.
It's more inferred by the publishers.
But let's go with this here. Inclusions of stories dealing with evil shall be used or shall be published only where the intent to illustrate a moral issue, and in no case shall evil be presented alluringly, nor so as to injure the sensibilities of the reader. So wide. So ridiculously
catch-all.
wide. It's a catch-all. But you could have very easily said that the drug issue was falling within these parameters.
well,
And you may have gotten away with it. However, I'm still very proud of Stan and Marvel for sidestepping them just
and
in
we'll
case.
you're making a good point. We're going to come back in just a moment,
Yeah.
by the way. I'm going to explain in a moment why Strange Adventures is part of the images we're using.
Mm-hmm.
So, EC, in case some listeners aren't aware, was probably the cutting-edge publisher in the early 1950s.
Yeah.
Like, if you read their war comics like Two-Fisted Tales, Frontline Combat, it's great stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very edgy. And, the horror comics were graphic.
Yeah.
For the time period, I mean, they were very graphic. They're excellent. I mean, there's been a lot of, I don't know who has the rights to them right now, but there's a lot of great reprints of EC comics that are out there.
We've been seeing a few in previews recently.
Yeah, Fantagraphics was doing
Fantagraphics?
one
Okay.
specifically of EC Ray Bradbury stories.
Yep.
Oh, terrific. Yeah, a lot of great creators worked on them. So, like, for example, here's another entry for the code. All scenes of horror, excessive bloodshed, gory or gruesome crimes, depravity, lust, sadism, masochism shall not be permitted. And also, of course, if crime is depicted, it shall be as a sordid and unpleasant activity.
Or how about policemen, judges, government officials, and respected institutions shall never be presented in such a way as to create disrespect for established authority, unless, of course, they are Nixon.
That's after the code was liberalized.
I know.
I am not the head of the secret empire.
Oh, how times change.
And they didn't show his face, actually. It was implied.
No, they did not.
So-
Yeah.
You could also argue that this is also designed to drive EC out of business, too.
Oh, absolutely.
So that's the code in the 1950s. So Stan gets this letter, and he's like, all right, well, the government's telling us to do this.
Yeah.
And they decided to do it in a 3-issue Spider-Man story. I'll read here from his quotes. I felt the only way to do it was to make it a part of the story, and we made that 3-part of Spider-Man. I remember it contained one scene. Actually, this is Roy Thomas asking about how it was done. I remember it contained one scene where a kid was going to jump off a roof and thought he could fly. My problem is that I know less about drugs than any living human being. I didn't know what kind of drug it was that would make you think you could fly. I don't think I named anything. I just said that he had done something. Then Roy Thomas asks him, this is from Alter Ego issue 2 at year 2000. Do you think that there are any bad feelings on the part of the code of the Spider-Man drug issue? Stan replies, That was the only big issue we had. I could understand them. They were like lawyers, people who take things literally and technically. The code mentioned that you mustn't mention drugs, and according to their rules, they were right. So I didn't even get mad at them then. I said, screw it. You can hear Stanley saying, screw it. And just took the code seal off for those 3 issues.
Yeah.
Then went back to the code again. I never thought about the code when I was writing a story because basically I never wanted to do anything that was, to my mind, too violent or too sexy. I was aware that young people were reading these books, and there not been a code, I don't think I would have done the stories any differently. So you have on the screen now, this is an example of Leonardo understanding drugs. So there's a kid who was overdosed in some way. He's climbed up to the top of a building in Manhattan. He says, "I can float, fly like a bird." And he throws himself off the ledge, and Spidey saves him. Could you go to soapboxing?
Yes. Find it. Let me stop the share real quick so I can.
Sorry about that.
It. No worries.
The crux of the story is that Mary Jane, who remember wanted to be an actress, she gets a performance on an off-Broadway production. This is 1971. These stories came out. So
Right, you are.
this is the height of like Marvel trying to capture the pop culture zeitgeist. So Peter is dressed really hip. He's got like a fringed like vest.
Oh, yeah.
In another issue, he's got like gold chains he's wearing, which Mary Jane says are groovy. And then he makes a point of saying to Mary Jane, "Well, I got them from Gwen." So she's flirting with him. And Aunt May, he comes across Aunt May and Anna Watson downtown. They're going to see a production of Hair.
Oh, yes.
And Peter's like, isn't that a little too much for you? And she's like, "Oh, Peter, you're going to find the quote, aren't you? Of course."
Well, I'm going to find the specific because I actually recently tweeted the image because I was hilarious.
No, she tells Peter, "You need to be more hip," and he says, "You mean hip?"
Yeah, here's the here we are. Okay, great. So I love this particular panel so much. when they're first there, honestly, Peter, you're so old fashioned. You really should be more hip. You mean hip? Well, whatever you call it. Anna is teaching me to be a slinger.
By the way, this is beautiful. Gil Kane art with John Romita Sr. inking.
So great. Yeah, and of course, my tweet had to be, well, at least both Aunt May and her nephew are slingers.
Yes. But I love these issues. If you're a fan of how they would draw the city, I think these 3 issues in particular really capture. They're so dynamic in the way they portray Manhattan, like the leaflets everywhere and the crowds. Like it's really well done.
Something we brought up in our micro spot with as well.
You brought it up actually.
Yep.
So. They go to see Mary Jane perform. If you can go to Power to the People image.
Yes.
And the whole gang is there, and Randy Robertson, who is Robbie's son, who Peter befriended earlier on in the Silver Age. And Spider-Man has just saved that poor guy who thought he could fly. And Randy is telling them about, this has happened, and he's telling them and he's talking about how, drugs really affects. Let me find the issue myself. Sorry. Power to the people, power to the people. Here it is.
My favorite one that he says on this page is Spider-Man just saved some freaked out cat a few blocks away.
Yep. And he's saying, this drug scene really bugs. This is Randy. By the way, look at Randy's suit. Yeah. The classic late 60s, amazing.
Oh, yeah.
Purple jacket, red cravat.
Yep. Everyone figures it's the black man's bag, but it ain't. We're the ones who hate it the most. It hurts us more than anyone else because too many of us got no hope, so we're easier pickings for the pushers. But it ain't just our problem, it's yours too. Now he's looking at Norman, who's come to see Harry's girlfriend in this play. "Don't look at me, son. I know where it's at." "You do, huh? You sit all day in your ivory tower counting your bread. I worked hard for what I got, mister. So what do you want, a medal? Everybody works hard." Damn right. "Answer me this. How hard are you working for people? What have you done to fight drugs?" "Look, I'm just one man. It's not my responsibility." "You're rich. You got influence. That makes you responsible." Then later on, Norman says, "You have no right to smell mouth me." So what's important here is Norman gets agitated.
Yes, he does.
So they go to the musical to watch Mary Jane. And by the way, the Mary Jane play, they have her in tie dye. And there's psychedelic images behind her. She's kind of cavorting on. It's amazing. So Norman storms off after the production. He just looks upset, and he feels himself drawn to. I think Stanley describes as one of the sordid slums of the city, and he finds one of the goblins' hideouts. And lo and behold,
Yeah.
the Green Goblin returns.
Mind you, it was in the theater itself, the hideout.
No, it wasn't in the theater.
Oh, it wasn't in the
he
theater?
He had to find it. It was in the area.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
So he becomes the Goblin. Now, and it's a great Spidey Goblin, but my favorite title on all of Spider-Man, by the way, I think is the second issue. And now the Goblin. So what's important here is, though, Harry is, as you said before, Ian, is frail. Mentally, he's anxious. His father's has always mistreated him.
Yeah.
And Mary Jane dumps him callously. And he's insecure, and this drug dealer on campus lures him, and as Lee pointed out on the quote, he takes some unidentified, I don't know what the hell he took, some identified pill.
Intentionally so, mind you, because I think had they actually named the drugs, that would have been a step too far. And also, Stan doesn't know anything about drugs.
Right.
Yes.
So
I
that
think
too.
eventually, once Conway had kind of phased in as the writer, they retconned it as LSD.
Okay.
Which also would never do what it did, but that's okay.
Exactly. It's actually closer to today's opioid epidemic than anything else.
So go to the Harry O.D. image, please.
Yes.
Great Kane artwork. Gilk, another one of the all-time great Spider-Man artists.
Yep.
So Harry is crushed by Mary Jane's rejection, and he takes more of this. He overdoses, and he's in bad shape. And Peter has to try to both save him and deal with the Goblin, who remember whenever Norman's memory returns, he knows who Spider-Man is.
Yeah.
The fashion design in these issues. Go back to the one you just had on, please.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Look at the vest. Look at Peter's gold chain. Look at the belt. Like, this is hip Peter Parker.
Oh,
or as Aunt May would say, hep Peter Parker.
He's so hep. Look at how hep he is.
I love the CBR headline when Mary Jane drove Harry Osborn to drug addiction.
Yeah.
So the bottom line is, because I want to get more into the context in a moment, is that Peter gets Harry to the hospital in time, but he's in bad shape, and the consequences of this are going to play out as Murd mentioned. Forgive me, for quite some time.
Geek, not nerd. Yes.
And they battle, the Goblin and Peter, and it's a great battle between them. And Peter's able to lure Osborn to the window of Harry's hospital room, and Osborn goes into shock because he's like, "My boy, nothing must happen to my boy," and he reverts to his Norman Osborn, and so he doesn't remember he's the Goblin.
Yeah.
Again.
It's a great series of issues.
So what'd you think of this trio?
I thought this
First time reading it, right?
Yeah, this was my first time reading it, which is funny because one of the first Spider-Man comics that I ever read was a different drug issue from the 90s. It was written by Dwayne McDuffie, and it was basically the Don't Do Drugs issue special that they put out at that time. But it's just funny that it was written by a legend.
Rest in peace, great writer.
Oh, amazing. These issues are excellent for multiple reasons. One, as you said, the artwork. The artwork is terrific and really gets the point across of what's going on. And the moral drama of it all, we talked about this on our micro spotlight to bring it back from it. A lot of what happened here is a friend abandoning a friend. Because Peter, as is often the case with Peter, got so wrapped up with Peter that he left his vulnerable friend behind, and then this happened. I know that you can't stop these things from happening.
And also, in this case, Mary Jane, the way she callously rejected Harry.
The Mary Jane thing is probably my one hole in this entire plot line here, only because, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, because I know I very recently read these, and if she did explain why, then I must have missed it, but she said something along the lines of I'll explain it to you, why I'm acting this way. What was her explanation? Do we remember? Because I don't. And frankly, that's a hole. Why she was hitting on Peter the way she was.
Oh. Yeah, she's like, I'll tell you about it someday, something like that. I know exactly what you're talking about. I always inferred that she really was more interested in Peter than Harry.
Right. But that's not the way to go about it. And I think...
Yeah, but Mary Jane was not exactly the most
Exactly.
responsible person at this point in terms of her behavior.
Which was the problem when we were reading the micro spotlights. Also, for me, it's the one hole I have in the entire story is that I feel like, to me, that CBR headline that you mentioned, where Mary Jane, drove him to it. Mm-hmm. They kind of make it feel like that is actually what happened here, when in reality, no.
Well, Harry already...
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean,
Harry was a broken human
from when
being,
he was a little kid,
and this just didn't help matters.
No.
And
as is often the case in real life situations.
Exactly.
There's something that triggers the problems that are already there.
Absolutely.
Now, the other thing to point out is that not only Harry is traumatized by this, and the consequences reverberate they reverberate throughout the entire character's history, as Merv was noting before. So these issues also really establish a key moment in the Harry Osborn character as well, because up to this point he's Peter's best pal. He's the roommate. He's hanging out with Flash. He has the Fu Manchu for a period of time, which is again classic. But this, and you know that he's kind of meek with his father, but this takes it to a whole nother
absolutely
level. What'd you think of the story, Merv?
I actually have not read many of the comics that we've been talking about tonight.
No problem at all.
Yep, just don't have access to them.
Fair enough. Did you have any notes about this period or no?
Well, probably nothing that we haven't already mentioned here.
Yeah, but it's you.
When Peter tracks down and beats up the dealer.
Yes.
Oh, yes. That was one of my favorite parts of the entire book, because you could tell he's taking his frustrations out, but at the same time
also pulling his punches too.
Yes, and pulling his punches so that he doesn't come.
I'm hitting him with the flat of my hand. So he thinks that to himself. I miss thought balloons. Mm-hmm. So let's also remind everybody that why these issues are so important is that Lee got this request from the government.
Yes.
And the code says, well, you can't do it because it's depicting drug use. Now, go to the Strange Adventures image, please.
Yes.
I didn't know this until I did the research for this episode. Mm-hmm. This is the first mainstream comic in the code era that deals with drug use, and that this is the first appearance of the Dead Man character.
Yeah.
He's fighting opium dealers.
Oh, yeah.
Did you know this, Mert?
No.
Yeah.
Huh.
I just learned this. I didn't know this myself.
I feel like I've heard this reference before.
So this is Strange Adventures, was it 205?
Yeah.
But does it actually depict drug use?
I'm not sure about that. Maybe someone on the forums could help us out with that, or on Facebook. But when doing the research, it mentions drugs, but it got the code approval. Now, maybe they were asleep with the switch. Maybe they just didn't. Who knows?
Maybe, although maybe as Mert said, if it wasn't specific implicit use, then they may have gotten away with it.
That's possible too.
Yeah.
So the code says we're not going to approve these books, and Lee's, well, as I just read from Lee's quote, he's like, well, if the government wants us to do this, screw it, I'm going to do it. And he goes to Martin Goodman. Martin Goodman does back him.
Yeah.
And you have these 3 issues without the CCA seal on them.
Now, the CCA was never a government agency.
No.
Exactly.
It was the company's
self-censorship.
They set up this board, which is then run by a group of various, important people, I guess. Mm-hmm. And then they would submit the books.
Yeah.
And after there was such publicity about these 3 issues that the code then decided to liberalize itself a little bit. So after these 3 issues came out, and there was all the press about them, they amended their. I might have it in my notes. I'm not sure actually. Let me see.
Well, what I will say is that by the time the code stopped being used, no one even worked in the offices anymore. Like, it was just
that's true.
Yeah, it was just a thing that you put on comics.
That's true. That's a good point. So they liberalized it, and then not long after these issues, the classic Green Lantern, Green Arrow story comes out. My ward is a junkie, right, Speedy? Which is right on in your face, right on the cover.
Oh yeah,
with the CCA seal because they liberalized the code. It's also in the early 70s they started to say, all right, let's allow monsters to be in the books, demons, vampires. That's when you get the Marvel horror wave. Yeah. Early 70s, because the code was liberalized when it came to that as well.
Where you no longer have to have the schmampires, as I like to call them with Morbius.
Exactly, because Morbius was trying to get around the code.
Right, exactly.
Living vampire.
Yes, exactly.
I'm not a vampire, I'm alive.
Yeah. And
let me drink your blood anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
And as you noted, Ian, as the years passed and as taste changed in culture, the code became more and more liberalized until get to the 2000s, And Marvel was the first major company to dump it.
And nobody cared.
Yeah,
Literally
they had their own
nobody
rating
cared.
system, and then eventually other companies followed, and that was it.
Yep.
Now it's a conversation piece and a piece of history.
Was that before or after the Max line launched? Do you know? Because
I think it was before, actually.
Okay, because nothing will beat the first line, and talk about no code. I will always remember the very first line in a Max comic was the F word, and immediately I was like, "We're in new territory."
Was that an alias?
It was an alias.
Okay, that's right.
Yep.
That's right.
So that's it.
All right, so that's 96, 97. I'm glad you enjoyed it for your first.
Yeah.
It's a great Green Goblin story.
Oh, it is, yeah.
But it also the wider context of it, what's going on, and the whole package, the art, everything is just beautiful. And by the way, we should point out also, final retcon alert.
Yes.
Notice Gwen is in Europe
Yes.
during these stories.
Yes.
Because her father had just been killed by Dr. Octopus in issue 90.
Sins past, baby. Sins
Yes,
past.
and Spider-Man was blamed, and she goes to visit her uncle in London.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then at the end of these stories, like she reappears, and she and Peter have a wonder. And Stan writes, "Who says we never give Spidey a happy ending?" But decades later, there's a retcon that when she was in Europe, but actually this is a retcon on a retcon. So the first retcon is that she hooked up with Norman Osborn, who seduced her, and she's a college student.
Yeah.
And he impregnates her. And then you have like the super spider twins.
So stupid.
Then they retcon again. That actually didn't happen. That was part of a plot by Harry against his father. Hold on. To hire Mysterio. To hire Mysterio to implant these images to mess with his father.
Are we sure that Mojo Jojo didn't come up with this? This is the plot that I'm going to give you, and it's going to be this, and then that. Like it's
So the twins actually existed, but they're from genetic material of Gwen and Norman. They were not. Norman and Gwen never hooked up.
I am very, very glad. Even if the retcon still doesn't make sense, but okay.
Yeah. So as we come down to our finale here, as I mentioned in the beginning, we're not going to talk much about Gwen's death because we're go to our micro spotlight at 121.30, and we talk about them at length with one of the great Spider-Man experts, Dan Gavosden. But these are the issues I wanted to focus on because this is like the heart of Norman as the Goblin up until his death, so to speak. And of course, we're going to do a lot with Harry in future issues where he becomes the Goblin and all that. And again, the fallout of him having to deal with the legacy of his father.
That could be a whole other spotlight.
It's a whole Harry's got a whole other ball
be.
of wax.
Yep.
It could be, and you never know.
And Norman in the modern age, for that matter.
That's
because
that's a
he's
whole
oh
nother.
my god!
Well,
wow.
when we did Spidey Spotlights back in 2012, 10 years ago, we talked about a lot of these stories.
Yep.
Now, other media. Always like to end with some other media.
So other media, I mean, we can certainly discuss, as I said, the Spider-Man the Animated Series from the 90s, which adapted a decent amount of those early stories.
And how do you think they did with them?
I think they did a good job. The one main difference about the show was that Hobgoblin came first. And
Voiced by Mark Hamill?
yes, voiced by the one and only Mark Hamill. To this day, depending on who you ask from that production, they were either told not to use Green Goblin or they chose not to.
Because he was dead? Is that?
I think either because he was dead or somebody at Marvel's higher ups were like, you can't use him. And that was that. Once they did introduce him, though, a lot of these early stories, including the reveal of the identity and all that, were adapted. And even Gwen's death was adapted to a point only using Mary Jane.
Really?
I
haven't seen that.
She didn't actually die.
Okay.
She wound up disappearing into a portal into another reality, into another universe, which never actually truly got resolved in the show, even though it almost did in the finale. Because they thought they were going to have another season.
Oh, that's interesting.
It ends with essentially the first ever Spider-Verse.
Okay, all right.
Which has a version of Ben Reilly, which has a version of an Iron Man-esque Spider-Man in the
See, I haven't seen a lot
armor.
of these. I have to watch these.
It's on Disney Plus,
Yeah.
and I'd say it's well worth a watch. They even did Secret Wars at one
I
point.
trust your judgment. Huh?
But yes, a whole decent amount of these early stories were adapted
and
for
on the level of the
show.
cartoon, you thought they were done well?
I think they were, yeah. I'd have to rewatch them because I haven't in quite some time. But growing up, this was the most episodic of the animated series that were out at the time. X-Men eventually sort of adapted that,
Yeah.
you know, with their own, you know, attempt like Dark Phoenix saga and what have you. But they were really close to being full comic book issues per part.
You talked about when we did our other microspot on the Clay Tablet saga, they adapted that story.
Yes, they did.
Also.
Yep. Yeah. It's a great series, and I'm glad that it lives on in one way or another.
And of course, you had your Goblin experience in The Amazing Friends.
I sure did, yeah.
I'm in a way, I'm glad it frightened you that show was doing its job well. I know you were traumatized by a lot of things like that when you were a kid.
Did its job so well that I didn't watch the rest of the episode.
And we've already mostly mentioned the first Spider-Man movie using a bunch of.
What I wanted to say about that was when that came out, and I went to see, first of all, I was thrilled they cast Willem Dafoe,
Oh yes,
who was an actor I've always loved.
stunning.
His Norman Osborn, I thought was pitch perfect.
Oh, absolutely.
When Bird said, "Back to formula," and you're like, oh my God, he's out of his mind. Like
Yeah.
you see, or when
When he's talking to himself in the mirror.
he's in the mirror. But my favorite moment too. First of all, when he's at the board meeting, and they're forcing him out. Don't you know what I've sacrificed? And like the rage and madness. And then when he's at the Thanksgiving table, and Aunt May scolds him for grabbing the turkey.
Oh yeah.
He takes the knives and he's like grinning at her. He's like, it's Osborn. Like, and that's why I wanted to see him in a mask. We could see, like, it's Willem Dafoe, like his features. See that
sure.
face. It would be amazing.
Absolutely.
But I thought he was wonderful.
He
as
still
the
had the
role.
voice down though.
It's-
I mean,
oh, yeah.
even if he was behind a Power Rangers mask, like you still got Green Goblin voice, and even more so in the most recent Spider-Man movies.
And I thought the Raimi movie, the first two especially,
yeah.
really went to the source material, the spirit of them. He
Definitely.
just loved the period we're talking about in this episode.
What they did with Harry too in
Absolutely.
those movies, even if he was a lot cooler than Harry ever was, because he's James Franco, and it's hard for James Franco to not look cool.
Yeah.
They did a very good job of also at times making him meek,
Yeah.
and that was great. Yeah. Yep.
Gentlemen, I shot my bolt.
Yes. And this was.
Thank
this
you
was-
both for joining me.
Oh, 100% our pleasure.
We've enjoyed the glider ride to the fullest.
Yes, indeed. Yep. And only about 2 hours and 15 minutes.
That's pretty short for a spotlight.
That's not too shabby. And
And you're bite-sized.
yep. Amen to that. We thank you all.
Yes.
Boo, 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 over at patreon.com/Comic Geek Speak for continuing to support the show. And if you can't monetarily support the show, just shoot us a review on iTunes, or just let us know you're listening, or tell a friend about the show. That helps out just about as much. And Osborn! And with that, the role of Shane in person will be played by Mr. Adam Murdo.
It won't, because I don't have a screen in front of me.
Well then you know what? The role of Shane will be played by Ian Levinstein via memory, and we'll see how well I do it.
Stunt
There
casting.
we go. Visit us at comicgeekspeak.com. To leave a voicemail, you can call 267-702-6642. Stop by vanillacommunity.com. I always forget that to listen into the show. Oh my God! The
Heart, Levinstein! Go after the heart!
Follow us on Twitter at Comic Geek Speak, Facebook.com/Comic Geek Speak for the Facebook, and check us out on the Comic Geek Speak supergroup as well. We'd like to once again thank all of you for donating to the show. We really do appreciate it. And that is not what I meant to play. And as always, we are uniting the world's mightiest heroes, one listener at a time. I'm a bit of a scientist myself, you know.